Chapter 784. Not only did 11 Base often dispatch troops to fight against the underworld and cooperate with the police and the military, but they also had a special rescue team responsible for coordinating with the police. Once there was any crisis that required them to be dispatched, they would immediately arrive at the mission location, at the same time as the police. Xiaosu said to the rescue team members standing in front of him, "There are 2 fishing boats stranded in the southeast of Sea Area Number 10. There are 6 people on the 2 boats." After receiving orders from the police and the rescue team, 11 Base's rescue team is dispatched to rescue the trapped people. The base will send 2 helicopters there. Roger. The uniform response resounded throughout the area. Then, all the rescue team members quickly boarded the designated helicopters on the tarmac. 11 Base was the rescue team closest to Sea Area Number 10. Otherwise, such a small incident of a stranded fishing boat would rarely trouble the members of 11 Base. After all, whether in terms of cost or manpower, 11 Base's rescue team was one of the best in the United States. If it weren't for the fact that lives were at stake, and this matter had been noticed by the higher-ups, they wouldn't have asked for their help like this. The rain was still falling, but the helicopter was not affected. It flew straight up into the sky, the black body with the word 11 on it. At 7 o'clock in the evening, 11 Base's helicopter returned safely from the Number 10 Sea area. But the members who went to rescue were all soaked. Fortunately, the rain had stopped at this time. And fortunately, the storm at that time did not affect their helicopter much. They successfully rescued the trapped people, handed them over to the police on land, and did some handover matters before finally flying back to the base. The atmosphere after returning to the base was completely different from when they were preparing to rescue. Everyone took off their clothes as they walked. The wet combat clothes were really airtight and stuck to their bodies. Moreover, it was a rainy day today, and even the wind smelled damp. They were in a hurry to return to their residence, to take a shower and change into dry clothes. All the strong men who were willing to risk their lives at sea knew to take a shower after returning to the base. Nan Hung, who was usually a clean freak, went straight into the bathroom as soon as he returned to the base. Nan Hung took a shower. When he came out, he saw Han Jin come in. He wiped his wet short black hair, and glanced at Han Jin indifferently. Han Jin was not in a hurry to speak. After Nan Hung went in, he pushed open the door, and went to the cloakroom to change into clean clothes. Then he said, "Boss, these 5 snipers have been decided. 4 of them are from Team 1, and 1 is from Team 3. Their results are really good. Based on the current situation, I think we should arrange for them to stay in the same place. This will make it easier for them to train in the future. Besides, I definitely can't do the long-range sniper training. You are the only qualified drill master in the entire base. In the future, boss, you will have to personally take care of these 5 brats. I think we should arrange for all 5 of them to stay in your building. The floor below is empty anyway, so it'll be easier for you to interact with them in the future. This place is also close to Team 1, so they can rush over for their usual morning training. It'll also be convenient for you to arrange for sniper training in between." Nan Hung glanced at him. "How many empty rooms are there on the lower floor?" "I've asked Xiaosu. Xiaosu said there are 4 empty rooms, and 1 is a spare warehouse, which often stores some guns and other things. We can clean it up and empty the 5th room. The sniper trainees will live in a separate room, which will be good for their energy and many other aspects in the future. It'll be easier for them to manage." Nan Hung casually buttoned the black cuffs of his combat uniform and said lightly, "Isn't the room next to me empty?" Han Jin's eyes suddenly became a little meaningful. "The room next to you is indeed empty, but among these 5 brats, K is absolutely slippery, and the other 3 are not easy to deal with. I heard that they even put a stereo in their residence, and will sit together to sing karaoke at night. If they live on the same floor as you, they will be so noisy that you can't sleep at night. The only quiet and steady one is Feng Ling. Then let Feng Ling live in the room next to you. You can give her more advice in the future." Han Jin's words were quite artistic. Not only did he satisfy the boss's wishes, but he also gave the boss a reasonable way out. At the same time, he could arrange it properly, and it wouldn't make people feel that it was deliberate. Feng Ling was indeed the most steady and quiet, and Han Jin's words were not wrong. Nan Heng was still expressionless. At this moment, his hands had begun to fasten the buttons on his collar, and his eyes were very calm, as if he didn't hear the excuse at all, nor did he understand the meaning behind it. He just said naturally, "Then it's up to you." Okay. Han Jin was happy as soon as he heard this, but he didn't dare to be too happy. After briefly talking about other things, he went straight out to arrange accommodation for the 5 people. After the door was closed, the room returned to silence. Nan Heng coldly glanced at the dark night outside the window, walked to the window and looked out. From afar, he could see Feng Ling, who was taking advantage of the fact that it was no longer raining, and continuing to practice shooting in the training camp of Team 1. In the last test of today's assessment, the wind and rain were really too heavy. Although Feng Ling had excellent results in the first few tests, although she passed the last test, she almost missed it. Although it was not a big mistake, and she was indeed selected, for her, it was obviously a kind of failure. Her unwillingness to admit defeat showed up again at this moment. Unwilling to admit defeat? Did she think she could do anything? Nan Heng calmly looked at the lanky figure who was training alone. Nan Heng sneered in his heart. He knew that he was selected, because he was the last one. Was there something in his heart that he hadn't passed? Someone as capable as Feng Ling could get the top 10 in close combat in the United States, when she was only a teenager. And she was the first in the newcomer assessment in the base for 2 years in a row. Sometimes she completed tasks excellently, and sometimes she was doing well in the base. Being selected for the sniper training list meant that she was completely in the palm of his hand. Thinking of Feng Ling's usual coldness and arrogance in front of him, he finally had a chance to torment this guy. He hoped he wouldn't be soft-hearted. Be soft-hearted? Probably not. Nan Heng glanced at his palm again. The slender waist that he had touched in the private room of the hotel that night, and the softness that he felt when he was drunk. He didn't know if it was an illusion or something. That feeling was still in his palm. Maybe he really drank too much? But this inexplicable dilemma really made him extremely unhappy. Chapter 785. The next morning, after yesterday's storm, the sky in Los Angeles was clear. Especially over 11 base, there was not even a cloud. The sky was so blue that it made people's hearts clear. When Feng Ling and the others received a notice from Han Jin, asking them to go to the building where Boss Lee lived, no one was surprised. After all, although Boss usually didn't care about things in Team 1, he had to manage the long-range sniper training, even if he didn't want to. It was much more convenient to arrange for them to go to Boss's place. Han Jin said that each of them had a room on the floor below Boss Lee's residence. The 5 of them quickly packed up their things and rushed over. When they arrived at the floor, Feng Ling walked from the first of the 4 open rooms. K. Lei Peng Tam Lin Cheng. Looking at the names that had been pasted on it, she dragged her luggage to the 4th room, only to find that her name was not there. When she walked inside, she found that there were unopened warehouses and some empty rooms without any beds or living facilities. She paused, thinking that Han Jin had pasted the wrong name, or arranged for her to go to another floor. So she called Han Jin, but Han Jin said on the phone that she was now under Boss Lee's control, and asked her to go up and ask Boss directly. Feng Ling had to drag her luggage upstairs. When she was about to walk to the door of Boss Lee's room, she hesitated. She had never been to this floor before. Although Boss Lee was not very friendly with them, and although he was cold and sometimes unreasonable, he was not an arrogant and pretentious man. He lived with a group of men in the base. It was said that his room was only a little bigger than the others. He only had an extra study and a suite, but he didn't have any special decorations. He used the same things as everyone else, which was equivalent to the size of 2 rooms combined into one. Feng Ling walked while thinking about how to ask him later. If Boss Lee didn't intend to give her the right to live here, she might go back to the residence of Team 1 now. Anyway, she didn't care and wouldn't care so much. However, as soon as she walked in, she looked up and suddenly saw Li Nanheng standing in the corridor on this floor. At a glance, she saw that the door of the room next to his room was already open. It was rare that Lee Nanheng did not wear his battle uniform. He only wore black trousers and a black t-shirt, looking much more approachable. He stood there expressionlessly and looked at her indifferently. Feng Ling looked at him, and then at the open door behind him. She gradually had a bad feeling in her heart. When she approached, looked over Lee Nanheng's shoulder, and saw her name on the door, she was shocked. Let her live next door to Boss Lee. However, Nanheng had personally confirmed this terrifying idea of hers. You're here? The man glanced at her. Come with me, Feng Ling. Her footsteps were heavy. She dragged her luggage and followed the man into the room next to his. After entering the room, she realized that this room was much bigger than the one she stayed in Team 1. Even the bathroom was in the suite next door, which meant that this room also had a suite. There's no need to look. Most of the facilities on this floor are like this. Originally, it was used to receive people from the Lee family or from outside. Later, the base built a building specially for receiving people, so this place has been empty. Nanheng explained mildly. There are only 4 empty rooms on the lower floor. You can stay here for the time being. It's the same for upstairs and downstairs. Get up on time every day to train. Feng Ling took a deep breath. Boss, I can actually go back to Team 1's residence. Lee Nanheng looked at her expressionlessly. There was a lot of light in this room, and the sunlight fell on Feng Ling's head through the window. The boy's soft and clean hair seemed to be covered with a layer of golden light, but it also illuminated her silhouette. Although this room was much larger than the one she used to live in, this tall man was only half a meter away from her. He was neither too far nor too close, but for some reason, Feng Ling felt that the space was too small. Even the air instantly quieted down because of the man's gaze. Nanheng stood in front of her. She could clearly feel that the man in front of her was emitting an aura that could not be ignored and could not be refuted. She shifted her gaze away, planning to look around the room first. However, she lowered her head first, and the first thing she saw was their feet. She was wearing a pair of white sneakers, which was convenient for training and comfortable. He was wearing a pair of black running shoes. She could not tell what brand it was, but it was clearly expensive. Most importantly, she did not pay much attention to it usually. Now that she stood here and lowered her head, she found that her feet in front of him were like a child's, so much smaller. It directly highlighted the gap between her height of 1.68 and this man who was nearly 1.9 meters tall. Oppression. It was very obvious. Oppression. Further up, the man was wearing black trousers. She was still wearing a black uniform, the very loose kind. This man's legs were really long. Even with her long legs, she inexplicably felt a little ashamed of her inferiority. Her gaze continued moving up. The man's black t-shirt was very tight, and she could almost see the outline of the man's perfect figure through the clothes. When Feng Ling's gaze moved up, she directly saw the man's face. However, what she saw was the man's calm and cold face without any expression. Do I look good? He asked. Feng Ling abruptly came back to herself. I just came in to accompany you to see your new residence. After you came in, you carefully looked at me from head to toe for a long time. Let me ask you, do I look good? Are you satisfied with what you see? The man's tone was indifferent. Feng Ling had always wanted to be selected as a sniper. But now she suddenly wondered if she had dug a pit for herself to jump into. Feng Ling finally officially moved into this room, which was the room next to Boss Lee's. The reason was that she had applied to Han Jin to be transferred back to her original residence. But Han Jin said that after they left, he had already transferred a few more people from other teams. Team 1's residence was now full, and her original place had been taken by someone else. Since she couldn't go back, she could only stay here. The other 4 people were downstairs. She couldn't move too far away from here. And since she belonged to Team 1, the other teams wouldn't allow her to live there. Feng Ling placed her luggage by the bed and glanced at the room she was going to live in. She felt that this room was unbelievably clean. Who tidied it up for her? Could it be that there was a cleaning staff in this building? They even made the bed. How thoughtful. Chapter 786. At this moment, this mysterious cleaner came from next door, pushed open her door, and stood in front of her door, watching her standing by the bed in a daze. The man stood outside the door and said indifferently, "I'll give you a few hours to pack your things and settle down. In the afternoon, you'll go straight to the intensive training." Feng Ling turned back. "Are we starting the sniper training today? Otherwise, do you think I asked you to stay here for a vacation?" "Okay. I'll go to the training on time in the afternoon." Although he was the boss of the base, did he have to be so harsh with his words? Every time he left a good impression on her, it would be ruined by him. "I'll give you half a month to get used to it. You must participate in all the training without missing a single one. If Team 1 has a mission, you still have to follow them. Everyone in the sniper team has their own position and responsibilities. No one will specially follow you to help you. Observe and learn more. If you can keep up, continue to learn. If you can't, quit the sniper team." With that, he turned and walked out. "Boss," Feng Ling stopped him. Nanheng paused and looked back at her. "Is there anything else?" "Boss, is the room K and the others live in the same size as mine? If it's different, you can ask them to move to this room. I'll go down to the lower floor. I only need a small room." Nanheng looked at her for a moment and did not speak. Feng Ling knew that what she said was very abrupt, but since he almost found out her gender last night, she felt that it was necessary for her to stay as far away from him as possible. She wanted to learn sniper training, but it didn't mean that she wanted to use this method to get closer to Boss Lee. And she was really worried that one day, he would suddenly remember what happened on that drunken night. The more she interacted with him, the clearer some things would become. It was better to stay away from him. Feng Ling took a deep breath and approached him. She raised her head to look at the man who was much taller than her. "I know that I was ranked last in the last round of the assessment. I can't find any excuses for myself, but if my room is different from the other 4, and they find out about this, I'm afraid it won't be good. After all, I entered the sniper team with the worst results. In the end, I received the best treatment. This is really... The layout of all the rooms in this building is basically the same, and none of them are too small. Otherwise, why do you think there are only 4 rooms on each floor? That's because every room takes up a large proportion of space." Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and curled the corner of his mouth indifferently. "Just stay here. Don't be too full of yourself. No one is going to give you special treatment. You know yourself that you didn't do well in the last round of the assessment. You're lucky to be able to stay here." Seeing that he didn't intend to change her room, Feng Ling felt that it wasn't good to mention this again and again. She could only choose not to speak anymore and nodded solemnly. "I understand, boss." The next second, she saw Boss Lee smile slightly and throw down a few words coldly. "Stay here. Remember to keep quiet." Feng Ling. She didn't have much of a smile on her face, and now she didn't even bother to smile at him. After Nanheng left, Feng Ling stepped forward and closed the door. She looked around the room and touched the bedsheets and quilts. They were all new, but they were all very plain and pure-colored quilts. They were the same size and color as the quilts she used when she lived in Team 1. She had seen the beds of Kay and Fat Tai, and knew that this was the standard for the members of the base. At the thought that the person living next door was the boss of the base, and a bad-tempered boss, Feng Ling, who usually avoided him as far as possible, only felt a little frustrated now. Feng Ling lay heavily on the bed. After thinking about it, she felt that living here was really not free, but the feeling of not being able to resist was really too aggrieved. After living for so many years, for the first time, she clearly understood what the class effect was. Boss could decide her future direction with a word, and she couldn't even resist at all. She closed her eyes, got up angrily, and kicked over her suitcase, making a bang sound. She felt that her anger was not vented, so she opened the suitcase and threw the things in it heavily on the bed one by one. She even slammed the door of the wardrobe loudly when she went to put the clothes and supplies into the wardrobe. After venting for a while, Feng Ling felt that she probably needed to go out and get a sandbag to punch a few times every day. Otherwise, there was really no way to vent some of her anger. She was not satisfied with smashing the cabinet. She picked up the empty suitcase and threw it hard into the small suite next door. only to hear another loud noise. As soon as she threw it in, out of the corner of her eye, she suddenly noticed some noise coming from the simple small balcony outside. She paused, abruptly stopped her action of smashing something, turned around abruptly, opened the window, and looked at the man on the balcony next door. She saw Li Nanheng standing on the balcony next door, which was connected to her balcony. There was only a very low partition wall to separate them, but in fact, as long as he jumped over, he could open the window and directly enter her room. After completely understanding the layout of this room, Feng Ling's heart. On the balcony close by, Li Nanheng stood there expressionlessly, holding an unlit cigarette in his hand. Obviously, he was disturbed by the noise here. Did you take the wrong medicine? The man looked at her coldly. Feng Ling. No. You made such a big noise as soon as you moved in. Anjin actually said that you are usually very quiet? I didn't hold the suitcase properly just now and fell to the ground twice. Keep quiet. He reminded again, glanced at her, and when he left the window his cold voice drifted over again. If you're sick, go take your medicine. Don't mess around in the room. You're familiar with the doctors in the base's infirmary. Go take your medicine yourself. Feng Ling. She was not sick. She just watched the man disappear from the balcony, and then looked at the partition that was basically not separated by anything. Her blood pressure soared. If she really wanted to take medicine, she could probably only ask for a bottle of blood pressure medicine. She deeply felt that she should prepare a lock on this window. Otherwise, if Boss Lee drank too much one day, even if he couldn't enter her room through the door, it would obviously be very easy for him to enter from this window. Chapter 787. At noon, there was still an hour before the training time at 1 p.m. Feng Ling packed her things in her room and didn't go to eat. Kay and Tam ran upstairs to knock on her door, while Boss Lee was away. Feng Ling closed the door tightly after returning. When she heard the knock, she suddenly asked, "Who is it?" Kay and Tam exchanged a glance and didn't speak. Kay knocked on the door several times in a very rhythmic way. Feng Ling only listened for a while, and knew who was outside the door. She and Kay had agreed on a sound signal when they were out on a mission, and this rhythmic signal was only known to her and Kay. After hearing who the people outside were, Feng Ling got up to open the door and smiled. "What are you doing up here?" Tam held a bag of food in his hand and held it up, meaning to give it to her. Kay said with a smile, "Seeing that you didn't go for lunch, I guess that you should be packing your things, so I packed some food for you. Otherwise, who knows what kind of devil training you will encounter in the afternoon. I was afraid that you would be hungry." Feng Ling was very touched, but she was not particularly good at expressing herself. She nodded gratefully to Tam, and took the initiative to take the food. "Thank you, Brother Tam. I forgot that I haven't eaten yet." The two walked in and looked at her room. Kay said with a smile, "Yo, we thought that your room should be the same as Boss Lee's, but it doesn't seem to be much bigger than ours." Hearing Kay's words, Feng Ling finally believed what Li Nanheng said. The layout of the rooms in this building was almost the same. I heard that Boss Lee's room was remodeled after connecting two rooms. It must be more than twice the size of a normal room. Tam said as he looked at the environment here. "All right, Feng Ling, eat first. Remember to be on time for the afternoon training. Boss is not as easy to talk to as Drill Master Han, and Boss often targets you. Be careful." Feng Ling nodded. "I know. Kay. Boss said that the training will start this afternoon. It should be the 5 of us training together. I've never touched a sniper rifle in my life. I guess I'll be able to touch one this afternoon. Just thinking about it makes me excited." Feng Ling said, "I don't think we'll be able to touch a sniper rifle so soon. At most, they'll let us take a look and understand it. We'll probably need to train for a period of time before we're qualified to touch it." Tam. Feng Ling is right. Although Boss didn't care much about us when he was in Team 1, he was strict and cautious in his actions. If we don't meet the requirements, he definitely won't let us off so easily. Not long after Feng Ling ate in the room, Xiao Su came to see her. After all, the fact that Feng Ling lived next door to Boss Lee was big news to them. As soon as he entered the door, he saw that Feng Ling had already put on the new combat uniform with the sniper team badge. and was about to go out for training. Xiao Su looked at her and said with a smile, "Your speed is not bad. Just now, I heard from Kay that you didn't eat at noon. You should be eating now. I was worried that you wouldn't be late on your first day in boss's hands. Otherwise, he will definitely have ways to torture you. Our boss's temper is usually hard to deal with. This time, after coming back from the Li family, he often seems to have eaten explosives. Don't provoke him for no reason. Boss." Before he finished speaking, the door behind him opened. Li Nanheng stepped out expressionlessly and looked at him indifferently. Without blinking, Xiao Su changed his tone and said directly, "Boss is very friendly to the members of the base. Although his attitude is harsh, he works hard and is very responsible. In fact, in private, he is also very kind to us. He is really a good boss. If 11 base loses Boss Li, it will lose its soul and backbone." Speaking of this, Xiao Su turned his head and looked at Li Nanheng in surprise. "Oh boss, when did you come?" Then he looked chagrined. "Is there no sound at the door of Feng Ling's room? I didn't even hear when you came here, boss." Li Nanheng was very expressionless. He glanced at him coldly and turned away. Although the sniper team was directly under Nanheng, after all, there were too many things to do in the base. These 5 people were important candidates for the base to cultivate, so the deputy drill master of Team 2 was directly transferred here and became the deputy drill master of the sniper team. This deputy drill master was not proficient in everything like Han Jin, but he had deep attainments in marksmanship and long-range sniping. He was a strong long-range expert, but he was usually at a disadvantage in close combat. Han Jin was the type who was good at both long-range and close combat. The deputy drill master of Team 2 was also the most good-looking one among so many drill masters in the base. It was said that he was about 25 or 26 years old and had won the long-range shooting competition in the United States for 3 consecutive years. He had a very good personality and was very harmonious with both the superiors and subordinates. His name was Qiao Fei, a Chinese with American nationality. It was said that his family was also related to the American police. His family situation was not bad, but because of his hobby, he entered 11 base. Li Nanheng went to the conference room of the base and came back to the training ground of the sniper team. When he came back, he saw the deputy drill master Qiao Fei was teaching Feng Ling how to hold a long gun step by step. He was standing behind her and almost holding her in his arms to help her adjust the angle of holding the gun. With just a glance, Nanheng walked over expressionlessly and stood indifferently by the side of the training ground to watch this scene. The control of this kind of long gun is different from that of the short gun you usually use. If you don't hold the position of the butt firmly, it's easy to hurt yourself. Qiao Fei was still talking to Feng Ling. After adjusting the position for her, he said, "Try shooting now." Feng Ling fired a shot. Sure enough, because it was her first time using this kind of long gun, she couldn't grasp the weight and angle accurately. She failed to hit the bullseye and still missed a little. Qiao Fei smiled. "This is very normal. Don't be discouraged. It's already very good for a newcomer to be able to hit the side on the first time, holding a long gun like you." After teaching for a while, Qiao Fei turned to the other 4 to continue teaching. He was very serious and responsible. After walking around and making sure that the 5 of them had held the long gun properly, he took a step back, glanced at Feng Ling again, and walked over to her. Chapter 788. My cell phone is over there. I didn't bring it with me because of training, Feng Ling said, glancing at the shelf not far away. During training, they were used to putting their electronic products or sharp objects on the shelf so that they wouldn't be too cumbersome. All right, let's continue. Qiao Fei turned and was about to pick up Feng Ling's cell phone to call himself. However, before he walked over, he suddenly heard someone sneer behind him. Drill Master Qiao, I didn't know that you have the habit of leaving your phone number in the base. When you were in Team 2, several members waited at the entrance of the base's canteen day and night to ask for your phone number, but failed. Didn't you say that you rarely use your phone in the base? Hearing the voice, Feng Ling looked back and saw Boss Li. She did not speak and turned back to continue training. Hearing the man's words, Qiao Fei paused slightly and restrained the smile on his face. Boss. Nan Heng had heard their entire conversation just now. When he saw Xiao Fei pause, it was obvious that he was a little embarrassed. As a man, of course he could tell what kind of thoughts Xiao Fei had at a glance. He glanced at Xiao Fei. Stay away from Feng Ling. Xiao Fei was not angry, nor did he explain. He just smiled and said, Boss, I just want a phone number. I don't mean anything else. Look, I just joined the sniper team, right? In the past, I was used to being with those guys in team 2. Now that I've suddenly changed to a new environment and a few newbies, I also want to familiarize myself with them and communicate with them on a daily basis. You're already very familiar with these people from Team 1, so I can only occasionally chat with them on the phone about training. Boss, when you're busy from day to night, I'll get closer to them. Isn't it perfect for me to help you take care of these 5 people and share your workload? Li Nanhing smiled. Take care of them? So, you also want the phone numbers of the other 4 people? Xiao Fei paused. I haven't had time to ask for them. Then Xiao Fei smiled again. Boss, you're back. You continue to watch them practice. I wanted to go to the bathroom, but didn't have time. I'll go deal with it first. With that, he left without looking back. Hearing Xiao Fei's departing footsteps, Feng Ling turned back to take a look. Seeing that he had actually left, she hesitated for a moment before putting down the spear in her hand. She turned back to take a look at her phone. Nan Heng, what are you looking at? He hasn't left your number. Feng Ling, I'm just checking the time. How long have you been training? The sky isn't even dark yet, and you're already in a hurry to check the time? Nan Heng said coldly. Once you join the sniper team, you'll be trained strictly according to the sniper team's rules. The training schedule in Team 1 was different from here. You want to slack off when you just started? Feng Ling glanced at him speechlessly. First of all, it's normal for Drill Master Qiao to ask for my phone number. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'll send Kay's and the others' phone numbers to him. This way, it'll be convenient and less troublesome. Besides, Drill Master Qiao is very responsible. Besides, I just want to know what time it is and how long I trained before I successfully picked up the spear. I just want to record my daily training results. The sun is right above your head. You've been in the base for so long. Don't you know how to calculate the time based on the direction of the sunlight and the projection of the target? Feng Ling took a deep breath and then let out a long breath. Yes, boss, you're right. I'll listen to boss's teachings. From now on, I won't even touch my phone and will completely live a caveman's life in the base. Boss, are you satisfied? Nan Heng glanced at her. Do you mean that I'm too controlling and that you don't have the freedom of a normal person? I don't dare to think like that. Feng Ling smiled and at the same time, turned to leave. The moment she turned, the smile on her face disappeared. Nan Heng. He didn't dare to think like that. He just didn't allow Feng Ling and Xiao Fei to exchange phone numbers. But this guy was actually more anxious than Xiao Fei? Recalling how Xiao Fei had almost held Feng Ling's waist while teaching her how to hold the spear, Nan Heng coldly watched Feng Ling's back and movements as she picked up the spear again. It seemed that in the future, the meeting time had to be moved to the morning or evening. He had to personally come to the sniper team's training ground in the afternoon. The first day of training in the sniper team seemed to have returned to 2.5 years ago. Boss Li's requirements for every member's physical fitness and arm strength were very strict. On the first day, everyone was required to run 5 laps around the base with a piece of iron weighing up to 300 kilograms in their arms. Then do push-ups without stopping in the middle, and then from pull-ups to sit-ups. There was still a huge gap between Feng Ling and the other men's physical fitness. Under such high-frequency training, her movements from the push-ups gradually slowed down. After all, when she was in Team 1, her weight was less than 100 kilograms, but now she was directly carrying a piece of iron weighing 300 kilograms in her arms. After 5 laps, her arms were already weak and powerless, but now she had to do push-ups on the ground. But she knew that the spear training was only the first step. Not everyone could carry a sniper rifle. Right now, the requirements for arm strength and physical fitness were much stricter. But even so, Feng Ling did not complain about being tired, nor did she ask for a few minutes of rest. Only when Tam, Lei Peng, and the others couldn't bear it anymore, and asked for a 5-minute break to drink water, did she quietly stand by the side and rest for 5 minutes before gathering again to continue training. Even though she didn't have much strength in her arms, her training pace was consistent with the other 4. She didn't drag them down, but the short hair on her forehead was clearly drenched in sweat, making her look a little disheveled. Nanheng acted as though he did not see it. When he passed by her, he at most said lightly, "Straighten your arms, move more standard and speed up." Or he stretched out his leg to kick her weak arms. "Straighten your arms and straighten your knees. Stay like this for 15 minutes. Xiao Fei, who had already rushed back from the bathroom, frequently watched as the sweat on Feng Ling's forehead increased. Seeing that she was still gritting her teeth and persisting, he couldn't help but approach to say, "Boss, I haven't gone to Team 1 to take a closer look at Feng Ling's physical fitness index. Firstly, he's much younger than the others, and secondly, he's relatively thin. I think we should appropriately reduce the intensity of his training and train him separately. Even if it's just a little bit of training, it's fine. Based on his current physical fitness, he should have no problem with the usual training in Team 1. But in the sniper team, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for him to endure this kind of training." "Nanheng, are you the person in charge of the base, or am I?" "Boss, I'm just making an immature suggestion. I think Feng Ling is a very good seedling. If he's properly trained, he'll become an outstanding member of the sniper team. But this kind of intensity is really..." "Reject the suggestion. Chapter 789. Hearing their conversation, Feng Ling supported herself with her hands, raised her sweaty face, and said gratefully to Xiao Fei, "You don't have to reduce the intensity. I can keep up. It's okay." Li Nanheng didn't appreciate her words at all. He just glanced at her indifferently. "You have to keep up. Otherwise, get back to Team 1. The other 4 people who were also exhausted fell silent. Boss had always been strict. At this time, no one dared to say a word. Xiao Fei still wanted to say something, but Nanheng frowned. "Have you finished the handover of Team 2? If not, go back and explain everything clearly. Why are you standing here? Did I ask you to come here and stare blankly?" Hearing this, everyone hurriedly continued, for fear that they would be the next person to be blown up by boss's explosives. For the whole afternoon, the sniper team trained continuously for several hours. Finally, they could rest for half an hour, and then continue training. When it was dark, they went to eat, came back, continued training, and rested for another half an hour. At 9 o'clock in the evening, they could go back and officially enter their free time. Of course, these training times were not arranged by Boss Lee, but by the person in charge of the United States Police Department. As the United States was currently short of resources, such as long-range snipers, they hoped to bring in a few people who met the standards as soon as possible. At 9 o'clock sharp, the team was dismissed. Feng Ling's clothes were soaked with sweat. She looked at the other 4 people around her and found that all of them were drenched. In fact, it was not only the sniper team who had such devilish training. Usually, the training intensity of other teams was not low, but it was indeed much higher than before. Fortunately, the 5 people persisted. It was hard to believe that in a base that stood behind the United States Police and the military, all the members repeated such training every day. But Feng Ling had been on several missions. She knew that the so-called 11 base was not just a kind of glory. Glory was just the reward under the risk. What really mattered was that every mission had a certain risk. It was just that in recent years, it had been relatively peaceful, and there were no incidents that were too dangerous to require many people's lives to be taken. The current high-intensity training was also the foundation for them to protect their lives in the future. If they couldn't even stand this, they would not be qualified to go out with the main force in the future, and then they would lose the most fundamental qualification as members of 11 base. Stamina was always the most basic requirement. Although they had dinner in the evening, they had consumed too much energy today. Kay called the other 4 people over and asked Feng Ling to eat something together. Feng Ling turned back to see that Nanheng had not rested much in the past 10 hours. He had been training with them. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Kay, you go with them. I ate too much tonight. I'm not hungry now." After saying that, she quickly walked in the direction that Nan Hung had left, trying to catch up to that figure. She wanted to say that since she could endure this afternoon's training, she would definitely be able to hold on in a few days. She hoped that Boss Lee would not mind what others said. She could accept all the training content and did not need to be trained separately. Of course, she didn't want to have this privilege at all. She was originally a woman dressed as a man, so she was a sissy in the eyes of others. Some people didn't like her. If she had any special treatment because of her physical strength, she was afraid that there would be more topics of discussion in the base in the future. She didn't want to be the target of public criticism. Feng Ling's pace was very fast, but compared with Nan Hung, she still couldn't catch up with him, so she quickened her pace. She chased into the building and saw that Boss Lee had gone upstairs. Feng Ling quickly followed up. When she reached the second floor, she suddenly saw Han Jin waiting there. Nan Hung saw Han Jin and didn't go up again. The two stood on the second floor and talked. Their conversation inevitably came into Feng Ling's ears. "Did you see the message I sent you?" Han Jin asked. "Li Nanheng, yes. When I passed by outside this afternoon, I saw that you asked Feng Ling to do high-intensity training with the other 4 people. In fact, in the past 2 years, I can see that Feng Ling is a person who can endure any hardship, but from a comprehensive point of view, the other 4 are already in their 20s and strong, and Feng Ling is only 16. Such training is unfair to him. He can't bear it, but will not give up. He will definitely persist, but I don't think it will be good for him." Hearing her name, Feng Ling leaned against the wall on the first floor and was in a dilemma. If she went out, she would definitely hear something. Boss and Han Jin were both very sensitive people. They would definitely notice her movements. If she pretended to go back to her residence to rest and walked up, she would just interrupt their conversation. Before she had time to move, Nan Hung had already said, "The sniper team approved her as a candidate because of her excellent ability, not because of how fast she is or how agile she is. From a comprehensive point of view, if you want her to improve, you must specialize in her weaknesses. I treat her and the other 4 equally." Han Jin frowned. "But this is only the first day. Not to mention Feng Ling. The other 4 may not be able to bear it. Even if they can persist today, they may not even be able to get up tomorrow. It's another thing to push people to their limits." "Do you know their limits?" Nan Hung calmly and coldly interrupted him. Han Jin paused and understood what he meant. Nan Hung looked at him calmly and said lightly, "I know what I'm doing. Whether it's Kay, the others, or the young Feng Ling, their limits are far more than what you see. As a member of the sniper team, they bear more hardships and dangers than other teams. At least in this team, no matter what mission they take in the future, I don't want any of the 5 people in this team to be injured or sacrificed. What is the best way to protect them? Except to make them stronger. There is no other way." After thinking for a moment, Han Jin said, "This is what my dean said when I first entered the base many years ago. Indeed, at that time, I was also forced to train again and again. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't be who I am now. I think I was only 17 or 18 years old at that time." Nan Hung didn't speak anymore. Chapter 790. Speaking of which, he thought about it carefully. Perhaps they were just considerate of an excellent member like Feng Ling, and didn't want him to be forced too much. They still hoped that Feng Ling's future would be easier. But now he suddenly found that Boss Lee's consideration was really the most comprehensive. At least, except that Feng Ling was indeed too burdensome, there was nothing else against him. But if there was really any special treatment, many things would not be so simple. If it's really about taking care of and being considerate of this 16-year-old boy, the best way for me to take care of him is to train him into the most qualified and excellent long-range sniper. He will do what others can do. He can only do better than others in the face of danger. Feng Ling stood on the first floor, leaning against the wall, holding his breath, and not making any movement. But at this moment, she suddenly felt that Nanheng was the person in charge of the entire 11 base. He had unimaginable responsibilities on his shoulders. He was strict, but he also had to take care of every member and the value of everyone's existence. In the face of life and death in every mission, all the training now was the life-saving talisman of the members of 11 Base. If his ability was not up to standard, he would not be qualified to participate in more missions and operations in the future. Feng Ling wouldn't feel that there was anything special about her, because she was young and disguised as a man. And Boss Lee obviously didn't want to waste a talented person. Before leaving, Han Jin received a call. Because the next direction was the other side, he went straight through the corridor to the safe passage at the end of the other corridor, and went downstairs, not passing by this side. Nanhing stayed in place for a moment, thought of something, and turned to walk down. However, as soon as he took 2 steps down, he suddenly saw the person standing against the wall a few steps below. Feng Ling's clothes were still wet. She had really sweated a lot since the afternoon, and there were fine strands of hair stuck to her forehead. However, at this moment, she didn't feel tired at all, nor did she feel that she was different from others. Even though she knew that she looked disheveled, he was right. No one knew where the limit of their physical strength was. If they could exceed it by a little, they would have a higher chance of protecting themselves. She fixed her eyes on him, and in the corridor that was lit up by the automatic sensor lights at 9 o'clock in the evening, there seemed to be light in her eyes. Nanheng paused and suddenly stopped in his tracks. The air in the corridor seemed to freeze at this moment. He looked down at the exhausted young man leaning against the wall. Ever since Feng Ling entered the base in the past 3 years, all the hostility and indifference seemed to have turned into the most silent encouragement and trust at this moment. It was more like a pair of hands with endless driving force was silently pushing her forward. Feng Ling found that all the wariness and hatred she had for this person had turned into gratitude and trust at this moment. Nanheng ignored the burning gaze in her eyes and asked coldly, "Who taught you to eavesdrop?" "I didn't eavesdrop. Boss, you let us live here now. Kay and the others went to eat. I'm not very hungry. After training, I wanted to come back to take a shower and rest early. Unexpectedly, I met you and Drill Master Han talking here. I was afraid to disturb you, so I stood here and didn't dare to make a sound. Since you know we're talking, why don't you leave as soon as possible? This is the proper etiquette, don't you understand?" Nanheng's expression was as cold as ever. His attitude was even aggressive, which made it hard for people to see any warmth. Feng Ling paused, raised her hand to push away the sweaty hair in front of her forehead, and said in a low voice, "Sorry, I'll be careful in the future." Anyway, she didn't feel that he was stabbing her with his words. After hearing the conversation between him and Drill Master Han just now, Feng Ling was no longer afraid of his cold mask. She stood at the bottom of the stairs and suddenly smiled at him. "Boss, thank you for not thinking that I'm different from others because of my age and physical fitness. Thank you for letting me train with other brothers equally. And thank you for giving me this opportunity." As she spoke, the young man showed a sincere smile that he had never shown in more than 2 years, and looked at the man standing on the stairs against the light behind him. The young man's eyes were clear and shining. Nanheng's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Ever since Feng Ling entered this world, the two of them had never had a proper conversation. If it wasn't that his words were aimed at her, it was that she was cold and distant. When the clean, delicate and beautiful young man smiled like this, it was like a gentle breeze, brushing his heart. Nanheng walked down silently and didn't say a word because of her words, nor did he reply. When he passed by her, he slightly tilted his head and looked at her for a moment. "Do you know how embarrassed you are now?" He threw out these cold words indifferently and left. Feng Ling. She looked down at her dirty clothes and messy collar from training, and then lowered her head to smell the sweat on her body. Even if she didn't sweat as smelly as others, she had accumulated a lot of sweat in the afternoon, and it wasn't a pleasant smell after all. But she really appreciated Boss Lee's treating everyone equally, from the bottom of her heart. Feng Ling turned to his back and said, "Boss, I'm serious. In the future, no matter how much you strengthen our training in the base, if I say I'm tired or complain, I'll change my surname to yours." Li Nanheng didn't stop and said coldly, "Take my surname? In this world, the people who can take my surname are either my children or my wife." With that, the man glanced back at her indifferently. Do I look like someone who has a son as old as you? Feng Ling. Nan Heng was about to say the next sentence, but when he saw the boy didn't seem to understand the meaning of his words at all, he suddenly felt that there was something wrong with his brain for saying these words to a man. If he didn't want to be a son, would he want to be a wife? And AF King Man? Seeing Feng Ling's confused and obviously resistant expression to the words son and wife, Nan Heng's face became colder. Feng Ling didn't understand Boss's sensitive and unhappy heart. Originally, she wanted to express her sincerity in working hard. She also wanted to change the somewhat stiff relationship between her and Boss into a peaceful one. At the very least, she didn't always target him like this. So when the man turned to leave with a cold face, she quickly followed him, all the way back to the training ground to pick up the gun left there. The boy behind her was like a little tail that she couldn't get rid of. Chapter 791. Intensive training required someone to watch from the side, and it was impossible for Qiao Fei to watch him alone. Feng Ling didn't sleep for the sake of training, but he didn't sleep either? Did he really think he could get special treatment? Now, if Boss allows me to continue training, I can do another 100 push-ups immediately. So, it was already 9:30 p.m. He had watched these 5 people for the whole afternoon, and now he still wanted to continue training with him? Also, if Boss needs me, I can knock on your door at any time. I'll be there whenever you call me. Any time is fine. Nan Heng walked in front, ignoring her. Feng Ling followed behind and kept talking, expressing her current feelings and all the things she wanted to say. She had lived for so many years, and it was rare for her to talk so much. She really wanted to build a good relationship with someone, at least because she was really grateful and understood his good intentions. She really didn't want to continue being like this, and she didn't want to be targeted by an iceberg all day. Just as Feng Ling followed him forward a few steps, Nan Heng suddenly stopped. He stopped so suddenly that Feng Ling, who had been following him at a fast speed, didn't expect it. She directly bumped into his back and took another step back. When she looked up, she saw that Nan Heng had turned around to look at her. Feng Ling, the man looked at her. Yes. Do I look like I have the words "your personal instructor" written on my face? Nan Heng pointed to himself. Your training is the sniper team's matter. I'll pass on the necessary arrangements at any time. I'm not your personal nanny, nor am I your personal drill master. When you want to train, no one will care if you do 1,000 push-ups here. You don't have to drag me along. I don't really want to watch, understand? Feng Ling felt that Boss might have misunderstood something. Perhaps she didn't express herself clearly. But Boss, if I don't do some movements correctly, if you don't, you can practice again the next day. Arm strength is the first and most basic step of sniper rifle training. You have to know your limits. Do you want to waste your energy here? Or do you want to train with the others on time tomorrow afternoon? Only a fool would choose to do 1,000 push-ups here. Feng Ling followed Nan Heng all the way to the base canteen. She rarely came here at such a late hour. Usually, she would come here at the normal time of 3 meals a day. She didn't expect that there would be so many people in the cafeteria, even though it was so late. Nan Heng stopped at the entrance of the canteen. How long do you plan to follow me? Feng Ling replied. Not really. Kay and the others are all here. I followed them here, and will go back with them later. Speaking up to this point, Feng Ling felt that with her current mentality of wanting to ease the relationship between her and Boss, she would choose to gradually ease the relationship bit by bit. However, she couldn't control her mouth and said, Since we're already here, Boss, do you want to have supper? Shall we eat together? Why should I have supper with you? Because we live on the same floor. After eating, we can go back together. Feng Ling's expression was calm, as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. Nan Heng glanced at her. Living on the same floor isn't a reason. It's obvious that your skin is thicker than the city walls. With that, he walked away with a cold face. Feng Ling did not continue to follow him. She stood where she was and watched as he exuded an aura of stay away from strangers. He bypassed the noisy crowd and walked toward the senior members of Team 1, who were sitting in the innermost seats. For the first time, she lowered her posture and wanted to ease the relationship between them, but Boss Lee seemed to be very unhappy. What was he unhappy about? Was it because she had just heard his conversation on the first floor? A week later, at 2:10 in the afternoon, when the sun was hot, the 5 members of the sniper team were doing pull-ups on the training ground. This group had to do 50 pull-ups. After the 50 pull-ups, they could go to the shooting training ground to practice long guns. At present, they didn't have a chance to touch a sniper rifle. According to Boss Lee and Deputy Drill Master Xiao Fei, the 5 of them should be completely familiar with the shooting method of long guns before they were qualified to touch a real long-range sniper rifle. Tam, who was the closest to Feng Ling, counted 5, 6, 7, 10, 18, 26, 27. Li Nanheng was quite far away from them, but as if he had ears, he suddenly turned his head, walked up to Tam, and said indifferently, "From 1 to 50 count again." Tam's forehead was already sweating, and at this moment, cold sweat flowed down his forehead. He played dumb and asked, "What's wrong, boss? I see that you are good at counting. Read it out loud for everyone to hear." Tam was embarrassed. "Cough, boss, I was wrong." Tam was actually a little stunned. If this kind of lazy behavior was discovered by Deputy Drill Master Qiao, he would only need to be taught a few words, and then do the full 50 again. But it was actually discovered by Boss Lee. He suddenly felt that all the hair on his body was about to stand up. "What's wrong? I will definitely count to 50. "It's too late," Nanheng said coldly. "Come down, Tam." He didn't dare to resist at all. He jumped down from the horizontal bar and looked at Li Nanheng nervously. "Do 100 frog jumps on the spot," Nanheng said lightly. "Tam." "Boss, I really know I was wrong. What are you still waiting for? This 100, it's 200. "Boss, I won't dare to do it again next time. 300. Tam completely did not dare to speak. He squatted down with a sullen face, held his head, and began to do frog jumps. The 3 people by the side almost burst out laughing. Feng Ling couldn't help but laugh. She said that she felt that Tam's counting was a little strange, and didn't realize that he was being lazy. The tiredness of 10 frog jumps was similar to that of 50 pull-ups. Doing 100 frog jumps was a good lesson for him. At least he could remember it this time. Otherwise, if this happened again in the future, and he was kicked out of the sniper team by his boss, he would suffer a great loss. After the afternoon training ended, because it was the weekend, the training ended 2 hours earlier than usual. It was only 4 in the afternoon. Many of the senior members of the base were allowed to go out freely on the weekend. Those who were allowed to go out to the commercial street 5 kilometers away. 2 months ago, Feng Ling's cell phone was accidentally soaked in water during a mission. Although it could still be used, there was still some lag. She had never planned to change it, but Han Jin did mention this to Nanheng. Nanheng left the training camp and went to Team 1 to give some instructions. He returned to the sniper team's training camp and was about to ask Feng Ling to go out with him. However, the moment he walked in, he saw Feng Ling and Xiao Fei standing there talking. The sun shone down through the canopy outside the training camp, and the fine golden light fell on the clean and delicate side of the boy's face. Nanheng walked over expressionlessly, holding a car key in his hand. He said to Feng Ling coldly, "Come out with me." Chapter 792. Where are you going? Feng Ling looked at him in confusion. Didn't he say that today was the weekend, and he could have free time after the afternoon training? Li Nanheng still looked cold and emotionless. "Do you have anything to do at the base?" "No." "Then come out with me." "What for? Was there a mission?" Feng Ling didn't ask more, but nodded politely to Deputy Drill Master Qiao, who was giving her guidance just now. Xiao Fei also smiled kindly at her and waved at her. Feng Ling followed Li Nanheng out of the training camp. As a result, when she followed Boss out, she saw his Hummer. The pure black body of the car was cool and unique. Feng Ling didn't know much about cars. She only learned from the private conversations of others in the base that Boss Lee's car performance was particularly good, and this Hummer was a Polar limited edition specially made by the U.S. military. There were no more than 3 people in the entire United States who owned this car. "Why are you in a daze?" Li Nanheng looked at the boy who was staring at the car, and casually pressed the unlock button of the electronic car key. Feng Ling came back to herself and walked over without speaking. She didn't know what happened until she opened the door. Why did she get in his car? Boss, where are we going? Get in the car first. Feng Ling got in the car and fastened her seatbelt. When the man sat in the driver's seat, she glanced at him again. Li Nanheng didn't look at her, started the engine, and drove the car out of the base without saying a word. After driving about 2 kilometers out of the base, Feng Ling opened the car window, and the wind poured in, making her soft short hair a little messy and affecting the man in the driver's seat. His thin short hair was also slightly messed up by the wind, but the man drove quietly, and his calm face gave her a strange sense of security. Feng Ling had been used to relying on herself since she was a child. With her own ability, there were really few people who could make her feel safe. But at this moment, she strangely had such a feeling. When the beautiful and cool car drove into the city from the suburbs, many passers-by were shocked and curious when they saw the car. Although there were no more than 3 of these cars in the United States, after all, in this era, many things were passed down by word of mouth. For example, when a car like this, which represented absolute authority, passed by, many people were guessing what kind of person was sitting in the car. Nanheng held the steering wheel with one hand. When he saw the intersection ahead, his cold and calm face turned slightly, and he drove directly to the road on the right. They arrived at a very prosperous commercial street very close to the city center. On the commercial street of Los Angeles, Western architecture and culture were more obvious. However, there were also many Chinese and Chinese congregations on the streets. Looking at the people coming and going, one could tell that business was good. Feng Ling followed him out of the car. When she walked beside the tall and straight man, the black uniform on the man was a bit conspicuous in others' eyes, and it could be said that he was a little handsome. Those who didn't know 11 Base could only feel that the clothes they wore were particularly stylish, pure black, tough and handsome, and the appearance of the 2 men, one tall and one short, was particularly eye-catching. One was tall and cold, unsmiling, but as good-looking as a royal dignitary in an ancient Roman painting. The other was slightly thin but young. He was probably the so-called little fresh meat. He was fair and beautiful, and his clear eyes were expressionless, but he had a face that could attract the attention of all kinds of girls. It was hard to tell whether he was a man or a woman, but his facial features were indescribably clean and handsome. The point was that both of them were unsmiling. When the 2 men walked over like this, many passing women couldn't help raising their mobile phones to take a few photos of their side faces. Nanheng took Feng Ling into a mobile phone brand store downstairs in the shopping mall ahead, and the people in the store immediately came up to greet them. However, when they approached, it turned out to be Li Nanheng, and the brand store manager, who happened to be in the store today, hurriedly came up to him. Young Master Li. This shopping mall was the invisible industry of the Li family. On the surface, it was hard to tell who the actual legal person was, but only the internal staff knew that the Li family was the real power. It was rare to see Li Nanheng here, so of course they instantly became cautious, for fear that if they were careless, they would lose their jobs. Nanheng glanced at the manager of the mobile phone brand store. Take out a few of the latest mobile phones to have a look. They must be light, strong and waterproof. He didn't say many words, but the manager of the mobile phone brand store looked up at him in shock. Young Master Li, you came out to buy a mobile phone in person? Feng Ling didn't understand what was going on. She thought he took her out of the base for something, but it turned out to be to accompany him to buy a mobile phone? Boss Li was so strong that he didn't need to ask someone to accompany him as a bodyguard. So why did he ask her to follow him out? To accompany him to buy a mobile phone? Nanheng's tone was indifferent. He tilted his head and casually pointed at Feng Ling with his chin. Feng Ling turned her head sharply and looked up at him, and the manager also secretly glanced at Feng Ling in disbelief. Young Master Li usually didn't even come out to buy his mobile phone in person. The Li family had people in charge of these daily necessities, but young Master Li specially accompanied someone to buy a mobile phone. Moreover, it was a youngster who didn't look too old. Young Master Li, there are indeed several new mobile phones this month. Let me show them to you. The manager didn't dare to be negligent. After taking a look, He turned to ask the shop assistants to put all the new mobile phones here. Boss, I have a mobile phone. I don't need to change it, Feng Ling said in a low voice when the manager turned to ask the shop assistants. As if he didn't hear her, Nanheng walked in, sat on a single sofa by the window in the store, and picked up a stack of English newspapers to read. Feng Ling had to follow him, stood by the sofa, and then turned to look at the shop assistants and managers, who were busy bringing over several new mobile phones, and lowered her body to say, I really don't need to change my mobile phone. Didn't your mobile phone get damaged after that mission? Will there be occasional signal delays and delays? This mobile phone has been used for more than 2 years. It's time to change it. Nanheng's voice was still very indifferent. Pinching the newspaper with his fingers, he said lightly, a large part of the bonus for all your missions in the past 2 years is with me. Even if I buy a mobile phone for you, it will be your own money. Don't be polite to me. Feng Ling. The bonus for her missions. Chapter 793. However, Feng Ling had no concept of money. Besides, she lived and ate in the base. She didn't know what she could do outside the base, so she rarely spent money, so she didn't care how much it was. She never thought about it. It turned out that her money had been kept by Li Nanheng. Feng Ling's expression was as complicated as it could be. Why are my mission bonuses in your hands, boss? Feng Ling was a little surprised by this matter. After all, even if she didn't have a concept of money, she had heard some rumors about Nanheng and the Li family. In short, Boss Li was definitely not a person who lacked money. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had countless mountains of gold and silver behind him. The money she earned from missions in the past 2 years was probably nothing to him. He probably didn't care about it at all. So why was her money kept by him? If I put it in your hands and the members of the base borrow money from you, will you lend it to them? Yes. What if they don't return it to you? If there is really a special reason, they won't return it. Anyway, I don't have much use for it, and I can earn more from missions in the future. When Nanheng put down the newspaper and turned to look at her, he saw that the boy was looking at him calmly. Obviously, he really had no concept of money at all. He put the newspaper aside and said lightly, with your temper, I'm afraid that the money you earned from missions in the past 2 years will be borrowed by others. Han Jin specifically told me about your situation. He will only give you the necessary part of the bonus, and keep the rest for you for the time being. However, he only has one account, so it's not convenient for him to use it, so he left your money with me. After more than 2 years, it's enough to buy a small apartment in a less prosperous area of Los Angeles. Before returning to the base, I have booked an apartment with a good geographical environment and room for appreciation. It's under your own name, and you own the right to buy and sell it. It's just nearby. Do you want to have a look after buying a cell phone? Feng Ling didn't expect that she would have her own apartment. Nanheng glanced at him again and saw that the youth was staring at him in a daze. Clearly, he did not expect that he would have a house in just over 2 years. These worldly possessions were nothing to Nanheng, but for a person like Feng Ling, who had no one to rely on, rather than letting the money he didn't know how to spend be borrowed or cheated away by others, she might as well help him take good care of his money. At the very least, it was something that truly belonged to him. Feng Ling was silent for a long time. When Nanheng picked up the newspaper again, she stood by the sofa and said softly, "Thank you, boss." Nanheng's cold brows moved, and the corners of his mouth slowly curled into a faint smile, but he didn't look at her again. At this time, the manager of the mobile phone brand store had already brought over several new mobile phones that met their requirements. He even carried them over in a special ceremonial manner on a crystal tray covered with a red cloth. "Mr. Li, this is the new model that just arrived this month. It fully meets the requirements you just mentioned." The manager came over respectfully and said with a smile. Nanheng glanced at the mobile phones and said, "Let him choose. Buy whichever he likes." Feng Ling really didn't want to buy a mobile phone today, but Boss Li was right. After her mobile phone was soaked in water, it didn't work very well. Besides, it had been more than 2 years, and the model was indeed much older. When she was on a mission several times, Her mobile phone had fallen to the ground several times, and there were traces of bumps on the corner. Kay had scolded her several times in disgust and asked her why she hadn't changed her mobile phone. But she just said it could still be used. Why should she change it? But now that she saw so many new and beautiful cell phones in front of her, no matter how uninterested Feng Ling was in these things, she still found these phones to be much better than her old one. She couldn't help but pick up one of the most pleasing to the eye. The size was just right in her hand. The manager eagerly taught her how to use it. In just a few minutes, Feng Ling decided to buy the one in her hand. Then I'll buy this one, she said and asked, "Are you sure it is waterproof?" "Yes, of course, Mr. Li is here. Our department store is the property of the Li family. How dare I lie to Mr. Li? And now the mobile phone industry is so developed that waterproof is just an extra feature. Don't worry. As long as it's not in an underwater area with too much pressure or too hot water, there is absolutely no problem." Feng Ling nodded. She believed that. Some very expensive watches seemed to have the same principle. As long as it was not in particularly hot water, or places with too much pressure, it would be waterproof. "Little brother, don't you want to see other models? This one is okay. It's not big or small. It's just right." At this time, Nan Heng looked at the mobile phones in front of her and glanced at the one in her hand. "Indeed, this one is very suitable." Hearing young Master Li's words, the manager quickly nodded. "Okay, then I'll go to the warehouse to get a new one." After seeing young Master Li nod, the manager quickly turned around and hurried to the warehouse behind. While waiting, Feng Ling had been standing by the sofa obediently. Nan Heng glanced at him. "You've been training in the afternoon. Now you've been standing for so long. Aren't you tired?" "It's okay. I'm not tired. Boss, just sit here." From his words, it seemed that Feng Ling had completely regarded him as a bodyguard. Nan Heng raised his hand and pulled her arm, dragging her to sit on the sofa next to him. Feng Ling subconsciously hurriedly withdrew her hand, but when Nan Heng was about to let go of her hand, he paused and looked down at her hand, which was whiter than many men's, and her neatly trimmed nails were also clean. It looked very ordinary, but her hand, which had been trained to hold levers and guns, was still so white and tender. What kind of physique did this boy have? He had been exposed to the wind and rain in the base for so long, but he was still so tender? His hand only stayed on Feng Ling's hand for a few more seconds before he let go and said softly, "After buying the cell phone, do you want to go to your apartment to have a look?" Chapter 794. Seeing that Feng Ling clearly didn't understand the ways of the world, but he was always sensible, Nan Heng glanced at him again. The corners of his mouth unconsciously turned up, and his mood became much better. "Do you want to go back to the base cafeteria for dinner? Or do you want your boss to treat you to something good nearby? As long as I'm full, anything is fine." As a person who grew up in a pack of wolves for 5 years, some awareness had been deeply rooted in his bones. It didn't matter whether it was delicious or not, good or bad, or even whether it was cooked or raw. What mattered was that he could eat his fill. The only thing Feng Ling couldn't eat was too greasy, which would spoil his stomach. Nan Heng took out the new cell phone and checked it to make sure there was no problem. He didn't intend to stay in this store any longer, and left with Feng Ling. Feng Ling inserted the SIM card into the new cell phone and was about to walk to the parking lot with Nan Heng, but she saw that he didn't seem to intend to go to the parking lot, so she had to follow him while playing with the new cell phone. Nan Heng was going to take Feng Ling to have a meal nearby before going back. It was indeed dark, and it was already 6:40 p.m., just the time for dinner. Just as the two of them walked to the intersection behind the commercial street, suddenly, an old woman shouted anxiously, "Help me! Help me!" At the same time, a black figure quickly ran by, and the two of them stopped in an instant. Nan Heng just glanced back indifferently, only to see an old woman with gray hair and reading glasses staggering in this direction, shouting in English that someone had robbed her bag. This kind of street robbery was normal at night, and the clothes the old woman wore were not cheap brands, so it was not surprising that she was robbed. Before Nan Heng spoke, he suddenly saw that Feng Ling had already chased after her. Seeing Feng Ling's figure flash by quickly, Nanhung didn't even have time to stop her, and had already rushed over. Nanhung was speechless, and raised his hand to touch his forehead. This kind of robber was much easier to deal with than the usual missions of 11 base. In Feng Ling's hands, he was probably a small ant that could be pinched to death at any time. There was no need to worry at all. But dinner time was still delayed. Why didn't he feel that Feng Ling was willing to be nosy? When the old woman saw someone chasing after her, she hurriedly stopped on the side of the street and breathed heavily with her hand on her chest until a middle-aged woman suddenly walked out of a shop on the side of the commercial street. When Nanhung saw the middle-aged woman, his expression slightly froze. It was Madame Feng, Feng Mingzhu's mother, Qin Qiu. Ever since Madame Feng's second daughter fell into the sea when she was less than a year old, she had never given birth to another child. Many years ago, she blamed herself for not holding the child properly, causing the child to fall into the sea. She was only in her 40s, and although she maintained her face well, her hair was much whiter than her peers. After her second daughter's accident, Madame Feng began to worship Buddha, and rarely left the Feng family's home. When the Li family tried to matchmake him and Feng Mingzhu, Madame Feng didn't show up. "Mom, what's wrong?" Madame Feng, Qin Qiu, quickly walked up to the gray-haired old woman and carefully and gently helped her up. "Someone robbed me. I saw that you had been in the shop for too long, and was worried about waiting in the car. I wanted to get out of the car and take a walk, but as soon as I got out, someone suddenly came over and snatched my bag." The old woman was so angry that she pointed to the front while panting and coughing. "I saw a young man who seemed to be chasing after the robber. I don't know if he can catch up with him." Hearing this, Qin Qiu hurriedly helped the old woman steady. "It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal as long as you're fine. Why are you chasing after a robber at such an old age? Aren't you afraid that you'll be in danger? It's all my fault. Just now, when I saw those baby clothes in the shop, I thought of my poor child again. I was so emotional that I forgot the time and kept you waiting in the car for too long." Hearing that this old woman was Madame Feng's mother, Nanheng didn't care much about the affairs of the Feng family. But now that Feng Ling had gone to chase after the robber, it was indeed inappropriate to ignore this matter. However, because he refused to marry Feng Mingzhu, it was not convenient for Nanheng to meet the Feng family directly. So he simply called the nearby police station. In less than 3 minutes, the nearest police station sent 2 police officers to take them to the police station to sit down and rest. After catching up with the robber, Feng Ling snatched the bag back, but she didn't expect that the robber had accomplices. Just outside the intersection ahead, there was a black car parked there. The moment she snatched the bag away, 2 people jumped out of the car and rushed at her with the robber. Although the robbers were accomplices, there were only a few steel pipes and knives in the car at most. There were no dangerous goods such as guns and ammunition. It was easy to deal with these 3 people, but these 3 people were strong and difficult to deal with. By the time all 3 of them were beaten to the ground, more than 10 minutes had passed. Feng Ling checked the bag in her hand again, looked coldly at the 3 people lying on the ground with bruised noses and swollen faces, and took out her cell phone to call the police. After making sure that the police would come soon, she took the bag and went back the way she came. When she went back, she saw 2 people in police uniforms beside Nanheng talking to him. She thought that with Boss Li's character, he wouldn't care about this kind of thing, but she didn't expect that he also called the police. She walked over and handed the bag to the 2 police officers. "The robbers are at the intersection. Other police officers have already gone over to arrest them. I've also recovered the bag for the old woman. Please send this bag back to her." Nanheng took a look at her and saw that there was no injury on her face. She ran here without blushing or gasping for breath. Sure enough, such a long period of physical training was not in vain. After the 2 policemen recognized Nanheng, they knew that the person who helped them to deal with the robbers was from 11 base. They immediately turned to Feng Ling. "Since you recovered this bag for the old woman just now, you should take it back to her and let her see who helped her. We don't dare to take this credit." "There's no need. It's just a bag. The things in it should be very important to the old woman." Otherwise, she wouldn't have chased after it so desperately. Feng Ling said calmly, I won't go. It's okay to go and have a look. Nanheng leaned against a statue in the middle of the commercial street, with a cold look, and smiled faintly. It's rare for me to take you out for a walk, and you performed a heroic act on the spot. Since you've done a good deed, it's good to give the bag back to him. Otherwise, the old man will probably come to you to thank you. It's better for you to go there directly than to let such an old man come to you in person. Chapter 795. Under the unanimous invitation of the police, and the fact that Li Nanheng was not in a hurry to ask Feng Ling to accompany him to dinner, Feng Ling agreed to return the bag to the old woman with the police. The nearest police station to this commercial street was only 3 minutes away by car. They took a police car there instead of driving their own car. In the police station, the old woman was still sighing. I don't know if this bag can be taken back. The old woman sighed and said, Qin Xiu, for so many years, I was afraid that you would feel sad, so I didn't tell you. Do you remember when my poor granddaughter was born? I asked an old friend who specialized in collecting antiques and jade to make a jade pendant for the child? There was a word Feng engraved on it. In fact, there was another jade pendant. It was an outer ring that could be buckled together with the jade pendant when it was carved. The jade pendant and the jade ring could be completely buckled together. At that time, I thought that you and the child were both in the Feng family and rarely had the chance to see each other. As a grandmother, I kept it as a memento, so I left the jade ring, and the jade pendant has always been on the child. Hearing this, Mrs. Feng finally understood why her mother was so anxious about the bag that had just been snatched away. After the child fell into the sea, I was really sad and could only look at the jade pendant in a daze every day. I was used to wearing it or putting it in my bag every day, and putting it on my pillow every night before going to bed. Only when I looked at it could I sleep well. Otherwise, in my dreams, there were always all kinds of terrible scenes of the child being swallowed by the waves. The old woman said with red eyes, If this bag can't be taken back, I'm afraid the jade pendant will never come back. How can I live in the future? I'm afraid I can't even sleep. Mom, if you didn't mention it, I really didn't know you had such a thought. Qin Xiu sat next to her and sighed. The old woman's eyes were red as she said, I was afraid that you would be sad. You cried until you fainted again, and again in the past few years. How could I mention anything about this child to make you sad? But after all, the bone is connected to the heart. You are my daughter, and the child who fell into the sea is your daughter. This blood is connected to blood. Every night when I close my eyes, I see the poor child floating back and forth in the sea. This pain in my heart is unbearable. Just as the mother and daughter were sitting in the tea room of the police station and feeling sad, a police car stopped outside. Feng Ling got out of the car and looked in the direction of the police station. She hesitated and heard Nanheng say, Go in by yourself. I'll wait for you outside. She turned back to see that Nanheng had also gotten out of the car. He casually leaned against the car door, his posture as cool as a breeze. He glanced at her as he cocked his head to light a cigarette. With one hand in his trouser pocket, he coldly glanced at her from the side. What? Do you need me to accompany you in for this kind of thing? Seeing that Boss Lee was not impatient at all, nor did he scold her for meddling in other people's business today, Feng Ling glanced at him again, and turned to follow the two policemen into the police station. Nanheng held a cigarette, and his cold face was as handsome as a ghost. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and glanced at Feng Ling's back. A police officer came out from inside and saw him. After asking the two policemen and Feng Ling in front of the door, he hurriedly came out to greet him. Mr. Li, I'm sorry to bother you with this kind of thing. Nanheng just glanced in the direction of the main entrance of the police station. It's not me. The one who helped you catch the robbers is the one who just went in. Then who is he? Nanheng flicked the cigarette ash. My disciple. Disciple. 11 Base had a lot of contacts with the police in the United States. Most people who knew their base knew how difficult it was to deal with Li Nanheng. Many people wanted him to teach them something in person, but no matter what method they used, they couldn't get a word of advice from him. It was said that even the most powerful team 1 of 11 base didn't have the good luck to be personally invited by Li Nanheng to train them. However, as outsiders, they only heard rumors. And these rumors were old news from many years ago. But now they suddenly heard this man in front of them admit that he had a disciple. It seemed that the boy who just went in was definitely not simple. Li Nanheng glanced indifferently at the figure that had disappeared in front of the main entrance, slowly exhaled a ring of smoke, and didn't say another word. He personally asked Feng Ling to stay in the base, personally gave her the official qualification to stay, personally supervised her physical fitness, step by step, and brought her into the sniper team under his complete control. If he wasn't his disciple, then what was he? On the other side, Feng Ling was taken into the tea room of the police station. Mrs. Feng, your bag has been taken back. It was this little brother who helped you catch up with the robbers. Please check if there is anything missing in this bag. If there is no problem, you can go back in peace. After the police said this, Feng Ling didn't feel it necessary to say anything to the two people inside, but just put the bag on the table closest to the door. Then she still didn't say much, but just nodded expressionlessly to the middle-aged woman and the old woman, who turned to look at her. Forget it, she turned to leave. The old woman first looked at her bag. Seeing that her bag was safely put there, the next moment, she turned to look at the person in front of the door, and her expression immediately stiffened. Wait. Feng Ling paused and looked back at the old woman. The other two policemen in front of the door also thought there was something wrong and looked inside suspiciously. Wait a minute, you are. The old woman's expression was a bit stiff, and there seemed to be some indescribable surprise in her eyes. She looked at Feng Ling's face, and her eyes gradually became filled with disbelief. She looked at Feng Ling, and then at Qin Xiu, who was also stunned. You. Feng Ling didn't understand the old woman's excited and surprised expression. She looked at the middle-aged woman next to her for a moment, and then looked back at the old woman. Is there something wrong with this bag? Feng Ling said lightly. I just took it back and didn't open it. Do you want to come over and check it first? Chapter 796. Feng Ling looked at the old woman and replied calmly. It's just a bag. I'll just take it back for you. We won't meet again in the future. My name is not important, and there's no need to say it. The old woman still stared at her face, but she grabbed Qin Xiu, who was a little absent-minded, and whispered, Look at him. Doesn't he look like you when you were a child? He looks so much like you when you were in your teens or 20s. Qin Xiu paused and said in a low voice, He does look a little like me. I was surprised just now. Look a little like you? You've almost forgotten what you looked like when you were young. But I'm your mother. I remember what you looked like at every age. This child really looks so much like you, even more like Mingzhu. Mingzhu looks more like her father, but this child really looks so much like you. The old woman grabbed Qin Xiu's hand excitedly and said, Do you think there's a miracle in this world? Would my poor granddaughter not have? Mom, this is obviously a boy. Although he looks like me, I'm a daughter. Although Qin Xiu also felt a little surprised and excited. After all, so many years had passed, so she calmed down a little. I know you just thought of these things again. It's not that there are no people who look like me in this world, but in the vast ocean, there was no chance that the child could survive at all. If it weren't for this, how could I have been chanting sutras and worshipping Buddha all these years? I just wanted to release my poor child from purgatory. But my child is a daughter, a lovely little princess. Mom, don't think a person who looks a little like me is a miracle. No, he really looks like you. The old woman was still very excited, and her eyes were fixed on Feng Ling. Being stared at by this old woman, Feng Ling's hair seemed to stand on end. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. This was different from the killing intent and hostility in the eyes of any enemy she had ever seen. She wouldn't feel anything for those kinds of enemies, but now goosebumps all over her body seemed to be falling off. Child. The old woman pushed Qin Xiu away and walked toward her tremblingly. She reached out to hold her hand, but Feng Ling abruptly moved her hand back and looked at the old woman in front of her warily and keenly. Even though she was an old woman, she still disliked the touch of strangers. Seeing that the child in front of her didn't seem to like being touched, and that her eyes were very cold and sharp, the old woman relaxed a little. However, she still stared at her face back and forth, as if she had long forgotten that her bag was beside her. She only looked at her face and asked gently, "Child, how old are you this year?" Feng Ling paused and replied, 16. 16 years old? Feng Ling nodded and saw a flash of disappointment and heartache in the old woman's eyes. 16 years old. The old woman sighed. That's even more wrong. My granddaughter should be 17 years old according to her birthday. Feng Ling didn't speak. She wasn't very sure about her age. After all, she had been living with wolves in the jungle before she was 5 years old. At that time, she didn't know that 365 days was a year. In the jungle, only the sun rose and the moon set. It was impossible for her to count the days one by one. However, when the group of people took her out of the jungle, because she was very thin at that time, they said she was only 5 years old, and set a date for her birthday. However, based on her body's development and height, she wasn't sure how old she was. But it should have nothing to do with what the old woman said. So she just looked at the old woman's melancholy expression in silence. The old woman thought for a while, and then looked up at her face. But it's really too similar. Granny, what do you mean by similar? Feng Ling didn't understand what she meant. Hearing the child call her Granny, the old woman's eyes turned red, and she reached out to hold her hand excitedly. Perhaps because the old woman's expression was too excited, and her movements were a little shaky. Although Feng Ling was very sensitive, she still resisted the urge to push her away. However, looking at the old woman's red eyes, she suddenly couldn't be ruthless. She could only hold her hand, and at the same time, the old woman held her wrist tightly. Are you a boy? The old woman stared at her face. How can there be such a beautiful boy? He's fair and clean. He's even more beautiful than a little girl. Before Feng Ling could reply, the slightly younger policeman standing by the side immediately laughed and said, Granny, you're not praising me. For us men, no matter how old we are, even if we were really tender when we were in our teens, we're still men. We definitely won't allow others to question our gender. When I was in my teens, I was also good-looking. When I heard that I looked like a little girl, I really burst into flames from the bottom of my heart. I was especially angry. I definitely couldn't listen to such words. The old woman paused, as if knowing that she had lost her composure. She had to withdraw her hand, but her eyes still looked at Feng Ling's face with some longing, as if waiting for her answer. Feng Ling hesitated for a moment. She had always regarded herself as a boy to the people she was familiar with. To an outsider she had never met, of course, she couldn't rashly tell her secret. Granny, the place I work in only accepts men. If I were a woman, I wouldn't even have the ability to help you chase the robbers. So how could I be a woman? Feng Ling didn't know why she, who had always been cold to others, couldn't bear to be cruel to this old woman. Even her words were a little euphemistic. Qin Xiu came over and held the old woman, who looked a little disappointed. When she looked at Feng Ling again, perhaps because she looked a little like herself when she was young, she really felt particularly close to her. I'm sorry, little brother. My mother was a little excited. Qin Xiu looked at Feng Ling's face and couldn't help feeling a little emotional. But this was really not the time to be emotional. So she said politely, It's getting late. Have you had dinner? In order to thank you, let's treat you to a meal and get to know each other. I think you should also be Chinese. It's really rare for us to meet in the United States in such a coincidental way. By the way, if it's convenient, please give me your cell phone number so that we can contact each other in the future. Feng Ling said indifferently, I won't give you my phone number, and you don't need to eat. It's just a small favor. If there's nothing else, I'll go first. With that, she turned to leave, not intending to stay any longer. Chapter 797. Little brother, you see, my mother is already so old. It's rare for her to meet a young man who can make her feel congenial. Qin Xiu looked at Feng Ling's back and said gently, Let's have dinner together. It won't take up much of your time. Let's eat near the police station, okay? Mrs. Feng hasn't been out of the Feng family for many years. I didn't expect that you came out today to accompany your mother. Suddenly, a voice came from the front door. Sure enough, no matter how old you are, filial piety comes first. In the blink of an eye, Qin Qiu saw the tall and straight figure enter her line of sight. At first, she didn't recognize him. But when she took a closer look, she remembered that she had seen a profile photo on her eldest daughter's phone. She immediately stared at him in confusion and asked uncertainly, "You are Li Nanheng?" Nanheng calmly glanced in Madame Feng's direction and slowly spat out these indifferent words. Mrs. Feng was surprised. "Why are you here, Mr. Li?" "I'm passing by." Nanheng didn't explain much. He casually put his hand in his trouser pocket and said indifferently, "The little brother in front of you is my man." Madame Feng was startled for a moment. She then looked at this extraordinarily handsome man, and at the same time, her gaze fell on the youth who had already walked to her side. After looking at them for a while, her gaze once again fell on Nanheng's face. When the Feng family took Feng Mingzhu to the Li family as a guest, although Mrs. Feng didn't go, she later learned that Nanheng didn't agree to marry her eldest daughter Feng Mingzhu. The elders of the Li family and the Feng family were more open-minded. Originally, it was just a casual agreement, but the elders on both sides had always kept their promises. Neither side was willing to do anything unkind and unjust, so they didn't want to get married. But she didn't know how the old man of the Li family and the old man of the Feng family talked at that time. In the end, she actually suggested that Li Nanheng should marry her second daughter Cenotaph to the Li family in a few years. This way, it wouldn't be considered a violation of the agreement, and it would also be a perfect explanation for the life of her daughter, who had left before the age of 1. At the very least, this way, her second daughter would not exist at this time. This decision angered Madame Feng for a long time. Her most precious second daughter had passed away before the age of 1. She carefully protected all the clothes her child had worn in the year she was born, and used those clothes to build a cenotaph to commemorate her child. She only wanted to keep everything related to her child in this world by her side, and carefully protect it. But she didn't expect that the old masters of these two families were so senile. How could they marry off her precious children who had passed away for so many years in such a way? In the past 2 years, this matter had been a thorn in Madame Feng's heart. On the one hand, this Li Nanheng refused to marry her eldest daughter, and on the other hand, this Li Nanheng actually dared to marry her second daughter, who had passed away many years ago. All along, she had been wondering what kind of person this only son of the Li family was. But now that she saw him in person, she found that this Li Nanheng was not some unruly playboy as others said, nor was he some rascal young master who casually joked about marrying her second daughter. On the contrary, this handsome and indifferent man had an unconcealable solemn aura. He was definitely not the unruly playboy she once thought. Such a man who looked like he couldn't be more serious. What kind of tone and mood did he use to say that he would rather marry her second daughter Cenotaph than marry her eldest daughter? Madame Feng stared at Li Nanheng for a long while because her mother had been paying attention to Feng Ling's face. At this moment, she even wanted to go over and hold the child's hand. Madame Feng came back to herself, held her mother by her side, and after thinking for a while, she said politely, "So this little brother is Mr. Li's man. So he is from your 11 base?" The Feng family and the Li family had been friends for many years, so she naturally knew the Li family's background very well. It was not surprising that Madame Feng knew the existence of 11 base. Nanheng looked sideways, glanced at Feng Ling who walked to his side, and obviously didn't intend to stay for long, and smiled slightly. This is Madame Feng, and the one next to her should be her mother. Speaking of this, Nanheng lowered his eyes and said in a voice that only Feng Ling could hear, "What a coincidence, your surname is also Feng." Feng Ling didn't find this coincidence strange. Although in the United States, Chinese people were a minority, and the surname Feng was also very rare, she didn't even know who her parents were, or what her real surname should be. So this coincidence could only be a coincidence to her, and had no other meaning. "Boss, the bags have been brought back for them. Let's go." Feng Ling couldn't resist the various complicated emotions and expectations in the old woman's eyes, and she felt that her heart was inexplicably sour. She raised her eyes to look at the man who was much taller than her. It's just a favor. There's no need to say too much to them here. Now you know there's trouble? Just now I saw that you were faster than anyone else when you were chasing the robbers, Nanheng said and patted her on the head. Feng Ling. How could they be confused? She didn't usually care about other people's business. If it weren't for the fact that the old woman was struggling and anxious to chase the robbers, she instinctively went forward to help, or she wouldn't have bothered to care about this kind of business. Madame Feng walked up to them with the help of the old woman. Mr. Li, since we are all acquaintances, and this little brother is also one of your people, we should sincerely thank you. You haven't had dinner yet, have you? Let's have dinner together. It's our treat. Nanheng's hand was still in his trouser pocket. He tilted his head and looked at Feng Ling mildly. Do you want to eat? Feng Ling was about to say no when Madame Feng spoke again. In addition, when the Feng family visited the Li family last time, I didn't go with them. This is also a pity. It's rare to coincidentally meet Mr. Li here today. Let's have a meal together. Hearing that Madame Feng and Nanheng seemed to know each other, and seemed to have some kind of relationship, Feng Ling immediately choked back the words of refusal. She turned to look at the two people, but felt that there was no reason for her to ask what Nanheng's relationship with them was. The moment she turned, she met the old woman's gaze on her. Feng Ling swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She turned, and her shoulder inadvertently brushed against Nanheng's. She whispered, "Boss, I'll listen to you." Nanheng's cold brows moved slightly. He glanced at Madame Feng indifferently. Chapter 798. Li Nanheng said, "Since Madame Feng is so kind as a junior, if I still refuse, it will be too disrespectful to the two of you. However, the base has a limited time to go back at night. We can't delay for too long. Even if we eat together, I'm afraid it will be too rushed." "It's okay. It won't be too hasty. We'll just eat something nearby. My mother happens to be tired and wants to thank the little brother who helped her get her bag back." Qin Xiu smiled and then looked at Feng Ling, who looked calm. "Little brother, let's go have dinner together." Since Boss Li had already agreed, Feng Ling had no reason to refuse. She nodded silently and didn't say anything else. The old woman had been looking at Feng Ling's face all the time and wanted to say something. She looked so much like Qin Xiu when she was a child. When Qin Xiu's second daughter was born, everyone said that the eldest daughter, Feng Mingzhu, looked like her father since she was a child, and when the second daughter was born, everyone said that she looked like her mother. How could there be two people in this world who look so alike? But this child's age was not right, his gender was not right. It seemed that everything was wrong. The old woman did not dare to say anything. But as soon as she saw the child in front of her, she couldn't hide the excitement in her heart. In the police station, she briefly explained the cause and effect of the incident with the robbers, and finally left the police station. Because the old woman was old, it was inconvenient for her to walk too far. There were indeed several good restaurants nearby, so she simply went to a nearby Michelin restaurant. After sitting down, Mrs. Feng Qin Xiu answered a phone call. Then her eyes fell on Feng Ling's face, and she looked at her with a smile. "Little brother, what do you like to eat? Just order it. Don't be too polite." Feng Ling didn't have much smile on her face. She had never sat down to eat with strangers like this before. She just nodded to Mrs. Feng and said lightly, "Thank you, I'll just have a simple meal." "Child, there's no need to be so polite. You helped us get our bags back. There's something very important in this bag. It's equivalent to half of this old woman's life. Such a meal is not enough to express my gratitude to you. Please don't be so polite with us." At this time, the old woman also spoke with a smile, looked at Feng Ling tenderly, and sighed with a smile. "Alas, maybe it's because we really hit it off. I like you very much. But why did you enter 11 base at such a young age? Although I know many people are not qualified to enter that place, it must be very hard. Is it very tiring?" Nanheng asked Feng Ling meaningfully. His voice was indifferent. "Feng Ling, It's not hard at all. Life in the base suits me very well. Everyone has their own life. At least, I'm very satisfied with my current life. Hearing such an answer, Nanheng's expression did not change, but the corners of his mouth slightly curled. The waiter of the restaurant came to order, but Nanheng was not interested in ordering. Mrs. Feng and the old woman also insisted that Feng Ling order. So Feng Ling chose 2 light vegetarian dishes on the menu, and then put the menu in front of Mrs. Feng and the old woman. Seeing the 2 dishes that Feng Ling ordered, the old woman said with a smile, "Qin Qiu, this child likes to eat light vegetarian dishes just like you." Yes, Qin Qiu knew what her mother meant by this. Perhaps it was because the boy in front of her really hit it off with them. They were so faded, so alike, and even their tastes were similar. It inevitably reminded her of the poor child who fell into the sea. Qin Qiu didn't want to mention these sad things in front of outsiders. So she looked calm and just said with a smile, "Mr. Li, we've never met, but I can recognize you. I think you probably know the reason." Of course, Nanheng didn't know that Feng Mingzhu had secretly taken photos of him with her cell phone. But he could guess that it was all because of Feng Mingzhu. He didn't answer but just smiled politely at Mrs. Feng. When the old woman pushed the menu back to him, he lowered his head to pick 2 dishes with a scrutinizing gaze, and then ordered a few kinds of soup stock and light vegetarian dishes for the 2 of them. Feng Ling was not a talkative person. She was usually a very silent person, and at this moment, she would not say a word unless it was necessary. Mrs. Feng first wanted to thank him, and secondly, she wanted to know what kind of person Nanheng was. After getting to know him, the unpleasant thoughts in her heart about this young master of the Li family gradually disappeared. Although she had never intended to marry a daughter who had been dead for many years to someone else, let alone in such an incredible way as a cenotaph, she couldn't reject a person like Li Nanheng from the bottom of her heart at this moment. If the Li family and the Feng family still had this idea, if Nanheng really planned to marry her daughter, who had died many years ago, at least in a sense, it meant that her daughter had always existed in many people's hearts and had never disappeared. If they really had to go to this step, Qin Qiu thought that maybe she wouldn't hysterically refuse him again. If her second daughter was still alive in this world, she would definitely like such a man. At this time, Qin Qiu received another call, then stood up and glanced outside. She smiled at a certain direction outside and said, "Yes, it's here. Come in." "Who is it? Is Shuka here?" The old woman turned to look at Qin Qiu. Qin Qiu nodded with a smile, and then explained to Nanheng and Feng Ling, "Today, I accompanied my mother out for a walk. My little niece just came back from studying in the UK a few days ago, and returned to Los Angeles today. We made an appointment to meet here, but we didn't expect that a robbery happened, so it was delayed until now. My niece also came to sit down and have some food with us." The old woman said on the side, "Oh, that girl Shuku is too talkative and noisy. Just let her wait at home. Why did you make an appointment here?" Mrs. Feng smiled. "She has been studying in the UK for so long, and you haven't seen your granddaughter for 2 or 3 years. It's not easy for her to find time to come back to see you. Isn't it because that girl Shuku is filial? Why do you dislike her?" As they spoke, the door of the restaurant had been opened, and a young but beautiful girl walked in quickly. The girl was wearing a baseball cap and a light-colored women's baseball uniform. She casually put a casual backpack on one shoulder and wore a pair of white sneakers. She looked energetic and came straight over. Chapter 799. When Qin Shuk saw Nanheng, she only felt that he looked familiar. After looking at him carefully for a long time, she suddenly turned her head and whispered in Qin Qiu's ear, "Aunt, is this the fiancé in my cousin Mingzhu's cell phone? The engagement had been cancelled. How could he be her fiancé?" Qin Qiu didn't explain much. She just gently patted the talkative girl next to her away, glared at her, and warned her not to talk nonsense. Then she whispered briefly about the encounter with the robbers just now. In just a few words, Qin Shuk widened her eyes in surprise. After listening for a long time, she finally understood what had happened, and turned her eyes to the 2 people opposite the table. Nanhing didn't cast any superfluous glance at the girl in front of him. His eyes were indifferent to the three women sitting together in front of him. On the contrary, Qin Shuk turned her eyes to Feng Ling, who had been eating quietly. When she saw Feng Ling, who had soft and clean short hair, and was fair and delicate and a little handsome, Qin Shuk almost couldn't believe her eyes. Then she turned her head and whispered in Qin Xiu's ear. "Aunt, is he the one who helped Grandma get the bag back? Is he very good at martial arts?" "Yes, he is. How can anyone who comes from a place like 11 Base not be good at martial arts?" Qin Xiu gently patted her head. "All right, don't ask so much. Now there are guests here. Let's have a quiet meal together. In the evening, your grandma and I will accompany you back." Qin Shuk's eyes also stayed on Feng Ling. She looked at the boy sitting directly opposite her, who was quiet and unostentatious, and especially quiet when eating and drinking. When Feng Ling inadvertently raised her eyes to look at her, Qin Shuk's face suddenly turned red. Then she suddenly took a deep breath and reached out to Feng Ling. "Hello, my name is Qin Shuk. I'm 17 years old this year." Feng Ling looked at the girl in front of her, whose eyes were shining for some reason. She didn't understand what was going on with her bright and shy smile. She glanced at her, thought for a moment, and didn't raise her hand to shake hands with her. She just nodded and said lightly, "And hello. Wow, what a beautiful little fresh meat." He seemed to be about the same age as her. It was rare to see such a quiet and handsome guy. Furthermore, he looked cold and indifferent. He was the kind of reserved and apathetic person that didn't need to pretend to be. Most importantly, he was good-looking. Qin Shuk heard Feng Ling's voice and did not feel cold at all. She said enthusiastically, "I heard from my aunt that you're from 11 Base, right? It's a pity that I wasn't there when you caught the robbers just now. You must have been super cool. Ah, just thinking about it makes me want to scream. If I were there to see how you caught the robbers, I would definitely faint." It was the first time Feng Ling had seen such a passionate and excited girl. She smiled lightly. "It's not as exaggerated as you think. I've loved watching martial arts movies since I was young. All the exciting movies I've watched in America can't satisfy me. I especially like..." Before Qin Shuk could finish speaking, Qin Xiu suddenly pressed her shoulder and gave her a warning look. "Just now your grandmother said that you talk too much. Sure enough, you can't stop talking. Hurry up and eat. This little brother and Mr. Li are guests now. Don't scare them." "Why would I be scared?" Qin Shuk glanced at Feng Ling again, and suddenly took off the baseball cap on her head. The long hair hidden in the baseball cap instantly poured down and scattered behind her. She casually shook her head and looked at Feng Ling with a natural and happy smile. She suddenly asked something that shocked everyone at the table. "Hey, do you have a girlfriend?" Feng Ling. "Nan Heng." "Qin Xiu." The old woman. Feng Ling looked at Qin Shuk's eyes for a long time before she understood. Was she being teased by a 17-year-old girl? Shuk. Mrs. Qin put down the cutlery in her hand and tugged at the crazy girl's arm. "Be more reserved. Don't go to England to study for 2 years, and be away from your parents and family for a long time. You don't even have the most basic manners and restraint." Qin Shuk didn't think there was anything wrong. "I'm just asking casually. When I meet the type of person I like, there's nothing wrong with asking for his phone number. What if in a few years, he really becomes your niece's son-in-law?" The whole table was silent. Feng Ling coughed. Before she could speak, she suddenly felt the chair she was sitting on was kicked. She turned to look at Nan Heng, who was calm but somehow looked cold. Before she could speak, she suddenly felt a weight on her wrist. The man silently grabbed her wrist and pulled her up. "Didn't you say you wanted to go to the bathroom? I'll go too. Come, let's go together." The man turned and walked away, not even looking at the people at the table who were stunned. Feng Ling thought, "When did I say I wanted to go to the bathroom?" But now she felt that she couldn't cope with the three of them alone. And she felt that Boss Lee strangely released some kind of pressure. So she simply turned and followed him. When she was about to walk to the bathroom, the new cell phone in Feng Ling's pocket rang with an unfamiliar ringtone. Only then did she remember that she had just changed her cell phone. She took out her cell phone and looked down to see that it was a call from Kay. She was about to pick it up, but the back of her collar suddenly tightened. Nan Hung directly grabbed her collar and turned her body around to face him. The man leaned over, and his good-looking thin lips almost pressed against her ear. Feng Ling felt that all the hair on her body stood up because of such a close distance. She heard the man's voice was very low, and even carried a heavy warning. "How old are you? Don't flirt with everyone you see in?" Feng Ling. "I didn't do anything." He really didn't do anything. However, Nan Hung remembered that little girl Qin Shuk was full of enthusiasm for Feng Ling, as if she couldn't wait to abduct Feng Ling home to be her boyfriend, and his face darkened. He remembered that Feng Ling had been with those men in the base for the past few years. They were all men, and no matter what, they were still brothers. However, as soon as he came out, he met a little girl who was interested in him. What would happen if he came out often in the future? Chapter 800. I'm not interested in that kind of girl. Feng Ling was telling the truth, but it was normal for a man to like a woman. It wasn't anyone's business. Why did Boss Lee have such an ugly expression? Was Boss Lee interested in that Qin Shuk? No way, the girl was not even 18 years old. Boss's taste was too. But thinking about it, Li Nanheng even dared to barge into a man's room after drinking too much, let alone a beautiful girl. After dinner, come back to the base with me. Nanheng didn't show any extra expression because of her words. He just glanced at her indifferently, and then glanced at her back facing the bathroom. Where are you hiding your eyes? Have you never been to the bathroom? Feng Ling had never been to the men's bathroom. When she was in the orphanage, she also had a small room by herself. There was an old bathroom and toilet in that abandoned building. Fortunately, there was no one else living in that building, so she had her own space. After arriving at the base, each room of the base members had an independent bathroom. She didn't go to the bathroom often, and usually went back to her room to do it. When she went out, even if she had a task, she would go far away and make sure no one could see her. But outside, she really hadn't entered the men's bathroom. Of course, it was not convenient for her to even enter the women's bathroom. It seemed that the only inconvenience for her to disguise as a man was to go to the bathroom. "Boss, I don't want to go to the bathroom. If you want to, I'll wait for you outside," Feng Ling said and walked out. However, before she walked out, she suddenly felt a weight on her shoulder. She paused and turned her head, only to see that it was Nanheng who took off his coat and threw it on her shoulder. "Hold it for me and wait outside." The man's voice was cold. "Okay." Feng Ling still did not dare to look back, because this was already the men's restroom. But there was a row of doors inside that could be blocked. From the door came the sound of other men standing inside, which made her feel uncomfortable all over. She quickly walked out. Seeing Feng Ling running out of the men's bathroom faster than a rabbit, Nanheng glanced at her. When the two of them returned from the bathroom and sat at the dining table, Qin Shuk saw Feng Ling coming back and asked for Feng Ling's cell phone number again, and kept asking her what her name was. Under normal circumstances, Nanheng remembered that they didn't know Feng Ling's name, so he didn't mind telling them. But at this moment, seeing this little girl constantly exerting force on Feng Ling, he remained silent. In the blink of an eye, in less than 10 minutes, Qin Shuk had taken the initiative to sit down next to Feng Ling. After all, this 17-year-old girl had lived in the West for a long time, and many of her ideas and habits had been assimilated by the West. She was flamboyant and bold. Feng Ling, who was usually very quiet, was a little embarrassed at this moment. Because she was sitting on the same bench as Nan Hung, she had to move closer to him little by little. In the end, she sat down with him leg by leg, and Qin Shuk still pestered him to ask for his name and phone number. After pestering Feng Ling for so long, Qin Shuk thought that Feng Ling was a shy and introverted boy. She simply changed her routine and began to take the initiative to pick food for Feng Ling, still talking nonstop. The girl's voice was crisp and pleasant to listen to, but she really had a lot of words. Mrs. Feng looked at her little niece with a headache, and the old woman also shook her head with a helpless smile. Qin Shuk was born in the same year and month as Qin Chio's second daughter. Since her second daughter had an accident at sea, for more than a decade, every time Qin Chio saw her niece, Qin shook. She treated her as her own daughter and doted on her. After a long time, Qin shook became more and more unruly in front of her and her grandmother. Not only did they spoil her, but her family also spoiled her. Qin shook was used to studying and living alone outside. She was open-minded and careless. It was hard to tell whether this was a good thing or not, but no one could control her temper. Fortunately, this child was not bad. Little brother, my niece's personality is like this. Since the two of you are about the same age, it is not too much to exchange contact information. In any case, it is also a good thing to make more friends of the same age. Qin Xiu saw that her niece had been unable to get the phone number, so she simply smiled and said something to help. As soon as Qin Xiu finished speaking, the people at the table suddenly felt as if the air around them had condensed. They really felt a little cold inexplicably, although Nanheng didn't say anything from beginning to end. From the smile on the corner of his mouth, and the way he flicked the ash off his cigarette, it was obvious that he was gradually exuding a chill. Why did young Master Li seem very unhappy when he just asked for a phone number? Could it be that 11 base had its own rules, that the phone numbers of base members could not be disclosed to outsiders at will? Thinking of this, Qin Xiu realized her carelessness. She hurriedly glared at Qin shook and sternly asked her to come back to her side and stop pestering Nanheng. Seeing that her aunt seemed to be about to get angry, Qin shook had to get up and return to her side. The meal finally ended under the old woman's concerned gaze toward Feng Ling. When she walked out of the restaurant, Feng Ling thought she could finally return to the base. However, Qin shook the little girl chased after her. Hey, little fresh meat. Feng Ling couldn't understand her new name and stopped out of politeness. Li Nanheng, on the other hand, saw him stop obediently. This guy who was usually so unapproachable was actually so kind to this little girl? Nanheng frowned. For some reason he loosened his collar again. Qin shook took Feng Ling's hand and whispered something in her ear. Feng Ling froze for a moment and didn't speak. Nanheng couldn't stand it anymore. He reached out and dragged Feng Ling over, looked at Qin shook indifferently, and acted like the boss of the base. His voice was cold and indifferent, and his handsome face was frosty and full of impatience. It's getting late. The base has a clear time to go back. In addition, as a girl, Miss Qin is too straightforward in her pursuit of a man. Think carefully about why you haven't been able to get his cell phone number for so long. Qin shook. Was Mr. Li, who had been cold the whole time, looking down on her? Qin shook was about to speak, but before she could say anything, she saw the little fresh meat she had just taken a fancy to being carried down the stairs in front of the restaurant by the collar by Mr. Li. He seemed to be very familiar with the way he carried him. She was dumbfounded. Feng Ling looked down at her legs that could walk normally. After being taken down the stairs, she said helplessly, "Boss, I can walk by myself. Don't always grab my collar, okay?" Chapter 801. Nanheng had just brought her down. Hearing Feng Ling's complaint, he let go of her. Feng Ling quickly took a big step back, as if she was afraid that he would touch her again. Nanheng's unfathomable eyes looked at her guarded expression, and his eyes gradually turned cold. Feng Ling was a man. At the age of 16 or 17, he had already experienced his first awakening of love. It was not strange for him to have feelings for a beautiful and adorable girl of the same age. Even though Feng Ling was usually cold and aloof, when facing Madame Feng's little niece, he was clearly much more patient. This was nothing out of the ordinary. Nanheng walked heartlessly toward the direction of the commercial street, where their car was parked. Feng Ling followed him, and didn't look at Qin shook, who was looking at her eagerly behind her. She finally walked quickly behind the tall and long-legged man, and suddenly heard the man's cold voice. The base also has clear rules and regulations for the personal affairs of its members. I don't think I need to remind you. The man's voice was so cold that Feng Ling wondered if Boss Li was really interested in that Qin shook, and disliked her for getting in the way. Cough. Feng Ling immediately followed him apologetically. I really haven't read the rules about personal affairs. Which one are you referring to, boss? The man didn't look back. You can't fall in love under the age of 18. And you can't have emotional entanglement with anyone outside the base, except your parents and relatives. Feng Ling heard such cold words. She was startled and looked up at the man's indifferent back. Nanheng didn't care about the guy who was left far behind and walked straight back to the commercial street. 10 minutes later, Feng Ling finally came back. When she opened the door and sat in, the man in the driver's seat didn't say a word and directly started the engine. The sound of the Hummer's accelerator was usually not loud, but at this moment, because the man suddenly increased the engine power, the accelerator instantly emitted a heavy sound, and the car directly rushed out of the parking lot of the commercial street. What were you doing in the back after dawdling for 10 minutes? The man who was driving looked ahead, and his voice was cold. My phone rang. I didn't answer Kay's call earlier, so he called again. In the end, Qin Shik chased after me and snatched my phone. She used my phone to call her phone and wrote down my number. Feng Ling answered bluntly, because she's a girl, and her personality is a little difficult to deal with. I spent some effort to take her phone and delete my number. That's why I was delayed for a while. When he heard that Qin Shik had snatched his phone and saved the number, the man's eyes were so cold that they could almost freeze the air in the car. When he heard that Feng Ling had deleted the number, his expression softened. By the time they returned to the base, it was already past 10 o'clock at night. Feng Ling bid farewell to Nanheng and prepared to return to her residence. However, the man behind her said coldly, "Wait. Boss, is there anything else? We live on the same floor. We'll go back together later. First, follow me to the base's conference room." All right. Seeing Feng Ling's serious expression, whether outside or in the base, Nanheng glanced at her again. Feng Ling was looking at him, but since she accidentally heard his affirmation of her, her eyes were no longer so cold and repulsive. Instead, she completely regarded him as a respected boss and leader of the base. Walking toward the base's conference room, Nanheng tilted his head to light a cigarette and said mildly, "The 5 of you will train for another month. After a month, those with excellent shooting performance can first undergo real long-range sniper training. For these days of training, what do you think of the other 4 people?" Feng Ling walked beside him and said, "What do I think? The 5 of you will undergo such an individual interrogation. Although the 5 of you form a sniper team, you are also equivalent to an enemy of the same level. Only those who are truly better than the other 4 people will be valued and will be taught separately. As for long-range sniping, not everyone can easily grasp it. The reason why I haven't let you officially touch the sniper rifle is because the 5 of you can only come into contact with it when you completely reach the passing line." With that, Nanheng placed the cigarette between his fingertips between his lips, narrowed his eyes, and casually unbuttoned his cuffs. He rolled up the sleeves of his black uniform until a vague but large scar appeared on the inside of his arm. Feng Ling didn't pay much attention to it before, because the scar in this position was not easy to be discovered. This was the first time she saw the scar on the inside of his arm. She didn't expect it to be so large. This is the consequence of picking up a sniper rifle without being familiar with the rifle and all the indicators. Nanheng took the cigarette with the other hand and said mildly as he walked, "When I was 12 years old, I thought I was very good at everything growing up in 11 base. When I wanted to play with a sniper rifle, because I hadn't practiced my shooting skills well and didn't know how to prevent the back of the sniper rifle from catching fire, I secretly went to the arsenal to take out my master's sniper rifle. After firing 2 shots, the back of the rifle caught fire, and the fire directly spurted out from the back, burning the place where my arm was connected to the butt of the rifle." Nanheng casually put down his sleeve and said mildly, "At that time, I can only say that I was lucky. Because I didn't know how to play with a sniper rifle, I accidentally fired the bullet from the front. Otherwise, if the bullet was not inserted correctly, it would have directly penetrated my arm from the back, which was equivalent to directly crippling an arm." At the same time, he curled his lips coldly. Burns aren't like other external injuries. No matter how capable the Li family is, and how they invited doctors from all over the world to treat this scar on my arm, in the end, they could only clean up the seemingly hideous sores on the surface of the scar. But if you look closely, you can still see the obvious difference in color between the newly grown flesh and the original skin. Even though the surface is flat, and there is no longer any effect, I will never forget the lesson I learned when I was 12 years old, because I didn't know how to use a large gun recklessly. Chapter 802. Nanhung glanced at her and saw that they had almost reached the base conference room. He threw the cigarette butt down and casually stamped it out. He said indifferently, "In life there is no need to think of others as noble. I am afraid that you will destroy my sniper rifle, just like when I was 12 years old. Because of a moment of recklessness, not only did I get seriously injured, but I also almost lost an arm. Even my master's sniper rifle was destroyed. Do you know how expensive a long-range sniper rifle is?" Feng Ling paused. Boss Lee really didn't know how to warn people at all. He was clearly concerned about their safety, but he had to relate it to the cost. Following Nanhung into the conference room, she found that Han Jin and several drill masters of the base were still waiting for Boss Lee here, including several people sent by the U.S. military. From the logo on their clothes, she could tell that their positions were not low. This should be a very important meeting, so Feng Ling stopped outside. "Boss, I'll wait for you outside." "Don't wait outside. Just go in." "But the people here are all." "Do you think you are a trustworthy member of the base?" "Of course." "Then go in." Feng Ling glanced at him again, but Nanhung had already walked in without looking back. She glanced at him again, paused for only a second, and quickly followed him in. At first, when they saw Feng Ling come in, Han Jin and the other drill masters were indeed a little surprised. But when they saw Feng Ling standing in front of the door, and didn't come over to sit down, he looked calm but was obviously a little reserved. It was not difficult to tell that Boss Lee let this guy in, not him, so they retracted their gaze. Boss had his reasons for his actions. Since he had allowed Feng Ling to come in, he definitely had his reasons as well. The U.S. military didn't fully recognize these people in charge of 11 Base, and only knew to tell everything to Nanhung. After glancing at Feng Ling at the door, they didn't think much, but there were only a few people in this conference room. It wasn't difficult to guess that these people should be related to their secret mission and qualified to participate in it. The soldier said solemnly, "Mr. Lee, I hope that only the few of you and the military will know about the kidnapping of the mayor of Foy and his family. The mission this time is extremely dangerous. We can only ask 11 Base to rescue the family of the mayor and his family. We believe in 11 Base's strength. The mastermind behind the kidnapping is a terrorist. Please be careful when you send out the rescue mission. The mayor's wife has a 3-year-old daughter. I don't know how long the family can survive in the hands of the terrorists. You must go and rescue them as soon as possible." The rest of the meeting was about the personal and family situation of the newly established mayor of Foy, as well as the motive of the kidnappers, the locations of their accomplices around the world, their weaknesses, and the locations of their hideouts that had been discovered by the American police and military, as well as all sorts of other situations were explained. Feng Ling stood by the side and listened. She could tell how dangerous this mission was. Under normal circumstances, once 11 Base's mission came into contact with terrorists who threatened the interests of any country, casualties were unavoidable. Those terrorists were all desperados. They would strap bombs on their bodies at any time and perish together with them. Opponents who were not afraid of death were the most difficult to deal with. The mayor of Foy was the younger brother of the president. The grudge was related to the newly established Foy, as well as the private affairs of the president's family. Not only could this matter not be leaked, but it was also of great importance. It could only be handled by the drill masters of 11 Base. The other newcomers couldn't participate. No wonder there were so many people waiting in the conference room so late at night. But since newcomers couldn't participate, Feng Ling was standing here. Could it be that for this mission, Nanhung intended for her to follow the drill masters? Even though she was a newcomer, aside from her stamina, she was outstanding in every aspect. Sometimes, even Han Jin would suffer greatly, because her speed was indeed not something an ordinary person could possess. For her to be standing here at this moment, on one hand, it represented Boss Lee's affirmation of her. On the other hand, it also showed Boss Lee's trust in her. It was no longer the suspicion he had for her when she first entered the base. Instead, it was true trust. Where did this trust come from? Was it because he could tell that she really had nowhere else to go? She just wanted to find a place that was suitable for her to live peacefully, without any ulterior motives. He could tell that she was pure, so he gave her this trust? Or, it was all because of the word trust. After the conference ended, the people sent by the American military did not stay in the base and directly left. Feng Ling stood in the conference room and didn't move. When Boss Lee and the other drill masters returned to the conference room, Han Jin saw that Feng Ling was still standing there, smiled, raised his hand, and patted her on the shoulder. Well, Feng Ling, you've encountered such a thing. Boss Lee allowed you to stand here and listen. You should understand what boss means. Feng Ling turned to look at Han Jin. I roughly understand. However, I've only been in the base for less than 3 years. Although I've gone on several missions, I've never come into direct contact with dangerous terrorists. I don't know if I'll be a burden to the drill masters. Since boss has allowed you to stay here, it means that you have a place to use your skills. Sometimes, when dealing with those terrorists who are not afraid of death, just relying on brute force is useless. Comparing savagery and stamina, those terrorists who are constantly on the run in various warring countries are definitely more resilient than us. However, your innate vigilance and speed are not something that just anyone can possess. Han Jin smiled. We've all seen your performance. Even if boss intends to bring you along, we have no objections. Rest assured and follow us. Regarding the mission of the mayor of Foy, is it very dangerous? Chapter 803. Listen to boss's arrangements. Boss would be with them the whole time. Therefore, this was the first time Feng Ling went on a mission with Boss Lee since she entered the base. This kind of mission wouldn't give them too much time to rest. Boss Lee only asked Feng Ling to return to her residence to prepare for a few hours. Before dawn, the assembly alarm had already sounded in 11 base. Feng Ling had already changed into a bulletproof uniform and carried a small black waterproof bag around her waist. Hearing the alarm, she opened the door and walked out quickly. However, the moment she walked out, she saw that Nan Heng was already outside. The walkie-talkie in Nan Heng's hand also lit up. He glanced at her and didn't speak. He took off the walkie-talkie, said a few words, put it down, and signaled Feng Ling to follow him with his eyes. Then he turned to leave. Boss, are we going to the mission destination directly? Feng Ling quickly followed. Let's go to the helipad first. Nan Heng picked up the walkie-talkie again and gave an order. All the members who were going to participate in this mission headed to the tarmac, including Feng Ling, who followed closely behind him. She didn't ask any questions and headed in the same direction with a calm and solemn expression. She followed Li Nanheng around the training ground at the speed of the wind, ran through the road behind the conference room, and arrived at the helipad with a wide view. Although Feng Ling was good at coping, she had never directly participated in such an important and overly dangerous mission. So at this moment, she had to listen to the arrangements of boss and other drill masters most of the time and wouldn't act rashly. She also knew that it was not the time to ask too many questions, but it was the first time she went on a mission with so many level 1 members and drill masters, including Boss Lee, after coming to the base for so long. Her heart was beating like thunder before a mission, but it wasn't because she was afraid. She couldn't explain why her heart was beating so fast. The helipad was in the largest open space in the base, and was very close to the signal tower above the base. 10 helicopters were parked neatly in the middle of the open space. Li Nanheng shouted, "Assemble!" All the members stopped in front of the helicopters at an extremely fast speed, and stood in a standard and neat row. At the same time, instructions from the base hall came from the walkie-talkie. At 5 o'clock from the signal tower, they could directly fly more than 300 kilometers to the sky above Foy City. At present, the kidnapped mayor and his family were nearby and might be transferred at any time. They needed to go there quickly. The first helicopter to lead the way had already set off in the 5 o'clock direction of the signal tower. The second and third helicopters immediately followed and followed closely in the air, waiting for rescue operations. After all, Feng Ling was still a newcomer, and this was her first time on such a mission. In order to avoid any mistakes, she had to follow the people she was most familiar with and had more advantages in all aspects. Thus, she sat on the same plane as Han Jin, Xiao Fei, and Li Nanheng. Nanheng spoke clearly into the walkie-talkie. Are there any ambushes around the warehouse where the kidnapped people are currently? How many people were around the warehouse? How many cars? How long has it been since someone was stationed nearby to check if there was an ambush underground? There are explosives buried near the warehouse, so it is not suitable for helicopters to land. Mr. Ted's family is still inside the warehouse, but there are signs of movement. There are quite a number of people nearby, so they should have made preparations. There is a sea nearby, so they should have chosen to escape by sea. Roger that. Nanheng put down the walkie-talkie and said in a low voice, Xiao Fei, Han Jin, when we reach the airspace in front, go to the number 1 rescue helicopter to prepare. Han Jin will be the main pilot. The members of the 10 rescue helicopters were rearranged into several groups. After hearing their boss's arrangements through the walkie-talkie, they all responded. When they reached the airspace, all the members were rearranged according to his arrangements. Nanheng was preparing to go to another helicopter. The moment he alighted, he gave one last order without turning his head. Feng Ling, follow me to the number 1 rescue helicopter. Just a moment ago, Feng Ling was still in a daze, wondering if boss had temporarily placed her aside because she was not skilled enough. When her name was suddenly called, she was like a warrior whose spring had been tightened. She abruptly raised her head and glanced in his direction. She quickly alighted the helicopter and followed him with large strides. She had never come into contact with those real terrorists. Other than hearing the bragging and descriptions of those senior members who had participated in missions in the base, they only spoke in a few words about how many detestable terrorists they had successfully dealt with, how many people they had saved, how many people they had eliminated, and how many of their brothers had died. Although she had heard so much, she knew nothing about those who had actually participated and had never come into contact with them. Those senior members who had safely returned rarely mentioned the names of their brothers who had sacrificed themselves. Although the members of 11 Base were all skilled, and the number of people sacrificed in such a dangerous mission would not exceed 10%, every single one of those sacrificed was their brother. Not a single one of them did not feel heartache. Under those calm descriptions, no one knew just how dangerous terrorists were, and how low the chances of surviving in the rain of bullets, mines, and bullets were. Feng Ling followed Nanheng excitedly. In front of her, the tall figure nimbly leaped onto the first helicopter that was flying at the front, and was also the most dangerous. He quickly sat down and put on his earphones. He was prepared to command and respond to the battle at any time. All of his actions were done smoothly without the slightest hint of panic. This kind of situation was completely different from when Feng Ling went on missions with the other newbies. What did it mean to be tempered into steel? This was it. Feng Ling's mouth was dry, and she felt her adrenaline surging. Her emotions, which had been agitated and unstable a moment ago, suddenly calmed down. She grabbed the cabin door, steadily jumped into the back seat, and fastened her seat belt. She looked at Han Jin, who was sitting in the pilot's seat, and Li Nanheng, who was sitting in the co-pilot's seat. She then looked at Xiao Fei, who was also wearing his earphones and waiting at the back. She then turned to look at Li Nanheng's back. She heard him say something to the person in the earphones. It was a short sentence about the formation arrangement and various matters to take note of when the helicopter arrived at the mission location. In the boundless clear sky, 10 helicopters once again rose into the air. The loud sound of the propellers drowned out the chirping of the cicadas and the sound of the wind blowing through the dense forest. The helicopters carried the most skilled members of 11 Base to the mission location. 11 Base gradually became a small black dot in front of them as the helicopters flew further and further away. The sound of the wind whistled through the air. Chapter 804. Li Nanheng continued to communicate with the people in the headset. The headset was connected to the base's command hall and several other helicopters. Whenever new instructions were sent from the base, he would need to immediately make an accurate judgment and issue orders to the people on the other helicopters. At this moment, everyone on the helicopter wore solemn and calm expressions. No one cared who was the newcomer and who was the instructor. Feng Ling found that she was unable to help at all. However, she continued to sit at the back with her back straight. She listened intently to every single word Li Nanheng spoke. The whistling sea breeze blew past her ears, blowing her short hair. She raised her hand and brushed her hair aside. She thought to herself that short hair was indeed the cleanest. Otherwise, her hair would definitely affect her movements and vision when she was in a helicopter. Sitting in the back seat, the loud sound of the propeller was almost all Feng Ling could hear. She had to lean forward and spend a lot of effort to catch all the orders Li Nanheng gave into the headset. Han Jin and Xiao Fei, who were seated in the front row, were both wearing soundproof headsets. Nanheng glanced at the south, where they were about to reach the mission destination. He turned back to look at Feng Ling, who had been sitting at the back the entire time, and turned to instruct Xiao Fei. Xiao Fei turned back to look at Feng Ling. He pointed to the headset on his head and shouted at Feng Ling, "Put on the headset." Feng Ling had never participated in such an operation before. She thought that the headsets on the plane were limited, and that she would not be given one. After hearing Xiao Fei's words, she turned back and searched for a while behind her seat. When she saw the headset hanging on the back of her seat, she pulled it over and put it on. Finally, the soundproof headset blocked out the loud sound of the propellers. Her world also instantly quietened down. All that could be heard was the faint sound of electricity in the headset. Maintaining communication with the scouts in the base's command hall. Currently, Mr. Ted's family of 3 has been quickly moved. They have been forcefully brought to a large private cruise near the seaside of the mission point. The cruise has already set off for the sea. We need a group of people to surround the enemy at the mission point, and another group to rescue them on the cruise. Otherwise, it is likely that the Ted family will be killed on the cruise. Base rescue team on plane 5. Please report your current location. Han Jin's voice came from the headset. The rescue team has received it. The U.S. military has already arranged for a rescue ship to be in the waters near the mission point in advance. But in order not to alert the enemy, they have delayed approaching. We will immediately arrange for the rescue ship to arrive quickly. We are behind plane 1 at 7 o'clock. The estimated landing time is 3 minutes later than plane 1. The person in charge of the rescue team answered from the plane behind. Sure enough, he could hear everything clearly after putting on the earphones. Although Han Jin was a strict instructor in Team 1, he was very approachable in private. It had been some time since Feng Ling left Team 1. She had stayed in the sniper team for such a long time, and it had been a long time since she heard Han Jin speak in such a serious tone. After another minute of silence in the headset, Nanheng's voice suddenly came again. Plane 7, report the progress of the tracking signal. Feng Ling's breathing paused slightly. She raised her head to look at the man sitting in the front passenger seat. While operating the position tracker specially installed by the base, he spoke in a steady voice based on Plane 7's short reply. The target mission location has already appeared in our field of vision. Plane 5, head to the sea for rescue. Planes 7 and 8, circle in the air and await further orders. The rest of you, hover in the direction of the target location at 3:30 o'clock. Have a radius of 7 meters and an altitude of 10 meters. The terrorists below had already sensed the approaching danger and had moved Mayor Ted's family of 3 to the sea. From afar, they could see the huge white private cruise ship heading towards the center of the sea. The 7 helicopters approached the most dangerous mission point, which was filled with explosives, and began to descend. While descending, the rescue team from Plane 5 had already flown towards the sea. Looking from afar, they suddenly saw a large amount of black smoke rising from the cruise ship. The smoke spread into the sky, and gradually, a faint glow of fire could be seen on the cruise ship. Initially, they could only see a white cruise ship. When the helicopters descended to a certain altitude, the flames on the cruise ship became more and more obvious. The flames on the cruise ship could be seen clearly. Ted's family of 3, with an ignorant 3-year-old child by their side. Just like that, they had been kidnapped for so many days. And now, on their way out, the terrorists intended to throw them into the sea and let them perish on the burning cruise ship? Looking in that direction, Nan Hung suddenly raised his hand to indicate for Han Jin to stop the helicopter on the other side. After descending, he removed his headset and turned back to look at Feng Ling. In the base, you and Xiao Fei are the best swimmers. If anything happens to that family of 3 on the cruise ship, I'm afraid the rescue team won't be able to save them. They have a child by their side, and will need to personally board the cruise ship to bring them down. You and Xiao Fei will cooperate with the sea rescue. Leave this to us. But boss, there are so many terrorists lying in ambush here. Our base didn't send out many people to begin with. Now that Feng Ling and I are being sent over. Xiao Fei frowned. Boss, I'm not sure if you're going to kill us or not. Time is tight. I don't have time to listen to your nonsense. Just listen to my arrangements, Nan Hung said mildly. Nan Hung calmly said, our first objective today is to rescue Ted and his family. Don't forget whose younger brother Ted is. Our second objective is to face those violent criminals. With so many people here, you two won't make much of a difference. Hurry and head over. In the base's conference room last night, Feng Ling had already heard about the landmines and ambushes around the mission point. Although the people dispatched for this mission were all elites of the base, it was too dangerous. Now that so many people had been transferred away, she felt that it was only right for her to help out at the front lines and not head over to the cruise ship. She removed her headset and was about to speak when Xiao Fei directly stood up and opened the cabin door. At the same time he said, Boss's words are in order. At any critical moment, you must listen to boss's arrangements. Feng Ling, come down with me. Feng Ling paused for a moment before turning to look at Nan Hung. The latter directly tossed 2 life jackets to her and said coldly, I know you're a good swimmer and don't need these things. Put them on first in case you need them. Feng Ling did not speak. She picked up the life jackets and held them in her arms. When she saw that Xiao Fei had already jumped down, she also jumped down. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. After she and Xiao Fei had retreated several meters, the helicopter in front of them took off once more. This time, it flew directly toward the mission point that was only 200 to 300 meters away. Chapter 805. Feng Ling followed Xiao Fei and sped towards the sea. A rescue helicopter had already approached and was slowly descending. At the same time, the military's rescue vehicle and rescue boat had also reached the vicinity of the sea. The cruise ship had already sailed for over 2,000 meters. The fire on the cruise ship was spreading rapidly. Initially, they could only see thick black smoke and a few sparks of fire. By the time the rescue helicopter descended to a certain height, the flames at the stern of the cruise ship could be seen more clearly. A few of the terrorists escorting Ted's family directly jumped into the sea from the bow of the ship, attempting to escape successfully through the surface of the sea. However, Ted's family did not appear. It was likely that they had been tied up in the cabin of the cruise ship, awaiting death. The military's rescue boat cooperated with the rescue helicopter and prepared to approach. However, the wind and waves were too strong. Both boats were swaying violently, making it difficult for them to approach. At this moment, the captain of the rescue team's helicopter sounded through the earpiece. Report, the wind and waves are too strong. We are unable to board the cruise ship to rescue them. The rescue team has requested to release an inflatable raft. Please inform the military's rescue team to put on all life-saving equipment. Our team members will be using the ship's rescue method. We need to bring them out before the fire spreads. The base's main hall immediately sent out a notification to the rescue boat sent by the military. Feng Ling and Xiao Fei had already boarded the nearest rescue boat. Since the boat was unable to approach, the two of them stared unwaveringly in the direction of the cruise ship, awaiting their next orders. Very quickly, an orange-red inflatable raft that could accommodate more than 10 people was released from the rescue boat. Two rescue team members alighted from the helicopter and laid down on the raft. Their hands paddled as they attempted to approach the smoking cruise ship. Currently, no one could be seen outside the cabin of the cruise ship. However, Ted's family was still inside. No one knew what the situation was. Feng Ling and Xiao Fei sat on the other inflatable raft that the military rescue boat had placed below and began to approach the cruise ship. The entire process lasted for about 2 to 3 minutes. Finally, the inflatable raft neared the cruise ship. Everyone quickly climbed up the edge of the raft, grabbing onto anything that could be used to push themselves up. Successfully, they climbed onto the smoking cruise ship. The rescue team's plane was still hovering in the sky, on standby. After all, with this kind of fire, if the plane continued to approach it, it would only cause unnecessary danger. Feng Ling, Xiao Fei, and the members of the rescue team put on fire and gas masks to block the thick smoke. They split into 4 directions and rushed toward the front door and the sides of the large cabin. The cruise ship had 6 floors, and each floor was about 300 to 400 square meters. It would take a lot of effort to find someone in such thick smoke. After Feng Ling entered, she directly rushed upstairs. The rest of them started from the first floor and went up step by step. They had to open every corner and place that could hide people. When she reached the 5th floor, Feng Ling suddenly paused. She turned to see a huge wooden box placed on the balcony of the cruise ship not far away. It was almost engulfed by the thick smoke. Feng Ling paused and abruptly rushed over. She kicked aside the chains on the wooden box and abruptly opened the heavy lid. As expected, the Ted family of 3 were trapped inside. A man, a woman, and a 3-year-old child were all tied up. Their heads were covered with a layer of black cloth. The 3 of them had already been suffocated by the thick smoke on the cruise ship and did not even have the strength to struggle. When the black cloth was abruptly removed, the first person to open her eyes was the woman in her 30s. She should be the mayor's wife. When the woman saw Feng Ling, her eyes were filled with fear. She then turned to look at the thick smoke and fire outside. The fear in her eyes turned to plead for help. She glanced at Feng Ling, and then at the frightened child, who was choking on the thick smoke and had tears in his eyes. The desire to survive in her eyes was even more obvious than the thick smoke around them. "Don't be afraid, I'm here to save you." Feng Ling spoke fluent English to the mayor's wife. At the same time, she quickly pulled off the black tape that was stuck on the mouths of the family of 3. The moment the mayor's wife regained her freedom, she immediately screamed at the top of her lungs, "Save us, we don't want to die, save the child." "Don't worry, we're from 11 base. We'll definitely ensure your safety." Feng Ling comforted her as she swiftly cut the ropes on the child's body. She then cut the ropes on the mayor's wife and the mayor's body. What happened to him? Seeing that the mayor was unconscious and only his wife and child were still conscious, Feng Ling carried the child out of the box and asked, "After we were kidnapped, my husband was constantly beaten up by those terrorists. He was already injured. When he was brought onto the cruise ship, his head was smashed, and he has been unconscious ever since." Mayor Ted's wife's eyes were filled with tears as she struggled to stand up from the box. When she saw that her child was in the arms of this young man, who had rushed over to save them, she looked gratefully at Feng Ling. She reached out to help the motionless mayor up from the box with Feng Ling. At this moment, the rescue team had rushed up to the 5th floor. After hearing the commotion, the 2 people who had arrived first immediately rushed over. "Quick, help Mayor Ted down first. He's still unconscious. The thick smoke is too fatal." As Feng Ling spoke, she removed the gas mask from her head and placed it on the head of the child, who was crying nonstop. She then turned to glance at the mayor's wife. "Our men will carry Mayor Ted away first. Can you still walk?" The mayor's wife frantically nodded at her. Her eyes were still nervously fixed on the child in Feng Ling's arms. It was clear that she wanted to leave with Feng Ling and the child. She did not wish to be separated from the child. 2 members of the rescue team carried the mayor, who weighed over 100 kilograms, out. Feng Ling carried the crying child in her arms, as she gestured for the mayor's wife to follow her. When the 2 brought the child downstairs, Xiao Fei rushed over. "How is it? Is there anyone else up there?" No, there's only their family of 3. Mayor Ted is currently unconscious. His wife and child are still relatively conscious, Feng Ling said as she continued to walk out. If the cruise continues to burn, the oil tanks will explode. In order to prevent the mayor's wife from receiving any further shock, Xiao Fei spoke in a soft voice that only Feng Ling could hear. Chapter 806. However, just as Xiao Fei was being urged by Feng Ling to get off the cruise ship and onto the inflatable raft, an accident happened. At that moment, the flames from the back of the cruise had already spread to the front of the ship. The entire cruise was about to be engulfed by the flames. Only the mayor's wife remained on the deck with a nervous expression on her face and Feng Ling, who was carrying her wailing child. The mayor's wife looked at the flames behind her and cried out for help in a panic. However, she did not dare to jump into the sea. She was afraid that she would not be able to make it onto the inflatable raft, and that she would be killed if she jumped into the sea. Thick smoke rose into the air, choking the mayor's wife as she coughed and cried. Accompanied by the hoarse cries of a 3-year-old child, Feng Ling felt as though her entire world was about to explode from her crying. The flames grew stronger, and the inflatable raft was unable to get too close to the cruise. As time passed, the inflatable raft had to move further back. Otherwise, it would not be able to carry anyone due to the flames. Seeing that the mayor's wife refused to jump into the water despite her cries, Feng Ling furrowed her brows and shouted harshly, "Jump! Jump! No, I don't dare. Jump if you want to live. Hurry! I'm afraid. If this place continues to burn, neither the 2 of us nor this child will be able to survive. Do you know how large the oil tank is on such a large cruise? Do you know that if the oil tank explodes, we will all be blasted into nothingness? Hurry and jump!" Feng Ling shouted angrily. "Jump?" Seeing that the mayor's wife continued to cry and shake her head, Feng Ling angrily held onto her child with one hand and pushed her off with the other. However, the mayor's wife held onto the railing with all her might. She did not dare to jump down no matter what. She screamed, "I don't know how to swim. I'm afraid of water. I'm very afraid. I don't dare. Hurry and jump." Xiao Fei, who was on the inflatable raft, could not hear their voices. He did not know why they had not jumped down after such a long delay. As a result, the inflatable raft that was supposed to catch them was forced to move further and further away. It was almost out of the safe distance. "Jump!" Feng Ling glared at her impatiently. "Do you want to die?" As she spoke, she took off her life jacket and wrapped it around the child in her arms. Without thinking too much, she threw the child in her arms down. Mayor Ted's wife screamed the moment she saw her child being thrown down. In the helicopter above, no one knew what the people below were talking about, but Xiao Fei's furious voice came through the earpiece. The trapped people refused to jump into the sea. The wind and waves are too strong, and the fire is spreading too fast. The inflatable raft can't get any closer. Request to board the ship and rescue. As Xiao Fei spoke, he reached out to catch the child who had just been thrown down. The child was wearing the life jacket Feng Ling had given him on the boat. The moment he fell to the surface of the sea, Xiao Fei quickly rushed over to catch him. He didn't let the child choke on the water, and directly brought him onto the inflatable raft. At this moment, the rescue team member on the helicopter looked down and frowned. "This won't do. The fire is too strong. We can't board the ship in time. It's going to explode." The next moment, the voice of the rescue team member, connected to the second-line communication device on the other side, sounded in the headset. "Boss, the trapped people on the cruise ship refused to jump down, and Feng Ling is still on it. If we continue to waste time, I'm afraid the risk will be very high. All the rescue ships and helicopters nearby will be affected by the explosion." Although Feng Ling was also wearing an earpiece, she could not clearly hear what was being said on the cruise. She could only vaguely hear the sound of electricity. She seemed to hear Li Nanheng's voice, but at the same time, it seemed like she did not hear anything. Even she was about to see stars from the thick smoke, let alone the mayor's wife who was crying by the side. All of a sudden, Feng Ling seemed to hear some movement. She abruptly raised her head to look ahead. The rescue team's helicopter was approaching without hesitation. She instantly frowned. What were they trying to do? Right now, they clearly knew the ship was about to explode. In order to ensure the safety of the other team members, shouldn't they be flying to a safe distance? Why were they suddenly approaching? Following that, she saw the bottom of the helicopter open. A rope ladder was lowered down. The rescue team leader personally climbed down the rope ladder. Feng Ling was stunned. She pulled off her earpiece and looked in the direction where the helicopter was approaching. The helicopter hovering right above the fire was affected by the high heat and emitted a loud noise. The propellers continued to spin rapidly, and the rope ladder swayed violently in the air. The rescue team leader quickly climbed down. After reaching the bottom, he successfully approached Feng Ling and the mayor's wife. Quick, come here. Feng Ling paused for a moment. She knew that they were here to save her. However, she did not forget her mission. The person who did not dare to jump into the sea was the mayor's wife. If this continued and the mayor's wife died, this mission would be considered a failure. She abruptly tugged on the mayor's wife's hand and handed it to the rescue team leader. The rescue team leader only glanced at Feng Ling. He did not need to ask to understand Feng Ling's intentions. Without any objections, he helped the mayor's wife up the rope ladder. The rope ladder could only take one person at a time. Seeing that someone had already successfully climbed up, the helicopter quickly flew away for everyone's safety. The rescue team leader and the mayor's wife were still hanging at the bottom of the rope ladder. However, at the very least, they had already left the explosion zone. Feng Ling directly tugged off the earpiece that could no longer be used due to the high heat, and threw it down. As Xiao Fei continuously shouted for her to jump, she abruptly leaped into the sea. Just a second and a half after Feng Ling jumped down, the cruise ship's oil tank instantly erupted with a fiery red cloud. A series of violent explosions rang out behind Feng Ling. The moment she landed on the surface of the sea, Feng Ling felt a violent, scorching force from behind her. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, and a metallic taste gushed out from her throat. Accompanied by Xiao Fei's heart-wrenching cry, Feng Ling lost control and fell straight into the sea. The moment she entered the icy surface of the sea, Feng Ling instinctively wanted to swim up, but the intense pain in her back and chest left her with no strength to move. Xiao Fei's inflatable raft had also been affected by the explosion. However, he had already successfully sent the child onto the military's rescue boat. He turned to look at the spot where Feng Ling had fallen into the sea. He wanted to place another inflatable raft down to save her, but was stopped by the military. At the same time, they stopped him from jumping down. They reminded him, "You can't use the inflatable raft anymore. It will cause a chain of explosions. The sea has already been affected. You can't jump." But Feng Ling is still down there. She was injured by the explosion. Let go, dash. Chapter 807. You can't jump down. After the oil tank exploded, the oil inside is still on the surface of the sea. It will still be burning for a long time. We can't be sure if there will be a second explosion. The people on the rescue boat pressed down on Xiao Fei. Don't jump. No. Feng Ling has already been injured by the explosion. Right now he can't swim out on his own. If we delay any longer, he will die. Let go. Let go. Calm down. Feng Ling is a member of our base and a member of our sniper team. Nothing can happen to him. Xiao Fei angrily pushed the people behind him away. Without saying another word to them, he directly jumped down and headed toward the raging flames on the surface of the sea. Not far away, on the helicopter, the mayor's wife was finally dragged up from the rope ladder. They placed her in the helicopter and began comforting her. However, at this moment, the captain of the rescue team glanced in the direction of the raging flames on the surface of the sea. He frowned and asked, "Can we still get closer?" The member in the cockpit replied sternly, "Captain, we can't go any closer. Earlier, we took the risk to approach, causing the oil tank of the helicopter to be affected. Right now it's in a highly heated state. Just listen to the loud noises coming from the helicopter. If we get any closer, our helicopter will also explode." But Feng Ling is down there. Have you all forgotten what boss said earlier? When the mission ends, not a single person can be left behind. Everyone must return alive, especially Feng Ling, who is a member of the sniper team and a member of Boss's training. If he dies in this rescue mission, even if our mission is completed, it will still be a failure. Quick, think of a way to save him. But the flames on the surface of the sea are still gathering. We really can't get any closer. When the captain of the rescue team heard this, he abruptly put on his headset. He frowned and reported the current situation to Boss, who was currently fighting with the terrorists. The area where Feng Ling had fallen into the sea was only 2 to 3 kilometers away from the shore. Although it was not deep into the sea, it was definitely at least 70 to 80 meters deep. Those who did not know how to swim would definitely lose their lives here. Feng Ling was a good swimmer, but at this moment, the bones in her body felt as though they were about to fall apart and reform. She was in so much pain that she couldn't move at all. As she sank into the cold seawater, she closed her eyes and felt a terrible sense of suffocation that made her feel an inexplicable fear. She didn't know where this fear came from, and she had never felt that she was afraid of water. But at this moment, an indescribable feeling drowned her like cold seawater layer by layer. However, when she closed her eyes and instinctively waited for death, Li Nanheng's figure inexplicably popped up in her mind. It was as though Li Nanheng was standing in front of her, looking at her sternly and coldly, saying to her, "Swim up. Only the weak would give up their last chance of survival. Swim up." Feng Ling furrowed her brows. Her fingers subconsciously moved, but she discovered that she could not move at all. Xiao Fei was indeed a good swimmer. Because there was a large amount of oil and fire on the surface of the sea, he directly swam in Feng Ling's direction. From afar, he could see Feng Ling's body sinking rapidly. Xiao Fei swam forward in one swoop and reached out to hold Feng Ling's waist. He directly held her tightly in his arms. Under the sea, and because of the oil and fire, it was temporarily impossible to tell which direction to go. He could only forcefully bring Feng Ling to swim in a temporarily safe direction. When they finally broke the surface of the sea, Xiao Fei held Feng Ling with one hand and used the other to forcefully wipe his face. He took 2 deep breaths and turned to look at Feng Ling, who was weakly leaning against him. The body of the youth in his arms was unbelievably soft. Xiao Fei furrowed his brows and called out to Feng Ling, seeing that there was no reaction. He knew that Feng Ling had inhaled too much smoke and choked on water. His lungs were blocked, and his breathing was affected. If they delayed any longer, they would really die. However, Xiao Fei turned to look at the position of the sea where he and Feng Ling were. Unknowingly, due to the momentum of the waves and the force of his own swimming, they were already very far away from the coastline. Those useless people who only watched, but did not do anything, had not driven their boats here in time. It was likely that they would not be able to find them in a short time. The rescue team of 11 base was hovering in the sky in the distance, trying their best to find traces of Feng Ling. But right now, Feng Ling's situation was not optimistic. Xiao Fei turned to look at how close they were to the coastline. Then he turned to look at an unknown island not far away. He did not know whether it was an island or a continent, but at least it was not in the deep sea. It should not take long for the rescue team to find it. Xiao Fei wiped his face hard again and directly held Feng Ling firmly. Just like this, he swam in the direction of the island with Feng Ling. With great difficulty, he finally brought Feng Ling onto the island. Right now, Xiao Fei had to immediately force out the water that Feng Ling had choked. At the same time, he had to perform CPR. He quickly unbuttoned Feng Ling's collar. Just as he unbuttoned the outer layer of her wet clothes, he saw the white collarbone exposed by the youngster. His movements paused for a moment before he continued to unbutton the next button. Suddenly, he saw the white breast-wrapping cloth inside. Just above the breast-wrapping cloth, there was a clear cleavage of a young girl's chest. Xiao Fei was completely stunned. Although he did not see any important parts, just the tightly wrapped breast-wrapping cloth and the vaguely visible cleavage on it, coupled with the fact that Feng Ling was clearly almost 17 years old, but never had a single stubble on her face, as well as all the things that made people feel that she looked like a woman. All of this was confirmed in an instant. It turned out to be a woman, a woman, a woman. He knew that he was clearly not gay, but in the base, especially after joining the sniper team, he always felt an inexplicable urge to get close to Feng Ling. Indeed, opposites attracted, no matter how well she pretended to be a man. But at the end of the day, she was still a girl. Xiao Fei first stared in disbelief at the pale-faced Feng Ling lying on the shore of the island. He slowly digested the fact that Feng Ling was a woman. After being stunned for half a minute, he quickly returned to his senses. He unbuttoned her outer clothes again, but in the end, he did not dare to touch her breast-wrapping cloth. Just by looking at the young girl's fair and alluring shoulders, he already felt as though he was committing a crime. Saving her was more important. He could not care so much and directly pressed hard on her chest through the breast-wrapping cloth. Chapter 808. Feng Ling. Xiao Fei abruptly leaned down to her nose, feeling the frequency of her breathing and breathing. At the same time, he continued to apply pressure on her chest. Breathe hard, Feng Ling. Can you hear what I'm saying? Breathe hard, quick. Under Xiao Fei's efficient and standard CPR, Feng Ling furrowed her brows because of the pain from the pressure on her chest. More importantly, it was because she had choked on water and inhaled a large amount of smoke, causing her lungs to ache uncomfortably. Cough. She abruptly coughed once more, finally coughing out the remaining water. She instinctively sucked in a deep breath, and then let out a long breath. She then coughed several times before reaching out to push Xiao Fei's hand away. She turned her body to face the person behind her, and coughed violently. Cough, 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 cough. Feng Ling, how are you? Do you feel better? Can you breathe normally? Xiao Fei stood up and walked around her, reaching out to help her sit up. Cough. Feng Ling was slightly unconscious. She coughed a few more times before slowly opening her eyes. From the corner of her eyes, she saw the azure sea and the distant shoreline. She looked in that direction, and took a deep breath after a long while. She said hoarsely, "I'm not dead." The cruise's oil tank exploded. Under normal circumstances, you should have died without a doubt. However, the cruise has been parked here for a long time. There isn't much oil in the oil tank, but the power of the explosion should have caused damage to your internal organs. When we return, we must immediately find a doctor to take a look. As Xiao Fei spoke, he raised a hand to wipe the sand and water off her face. At the same time, he pushed back the strands of hair covering her forehead and watched her pale face with concern. How do you feel now? Cough. Feng Ling coughed again. She wanted to speak, but she instinctively raised her hand to touch her aching chest. However, the moment she touched it, her expression faltered. She lowered her head to look at her combat uniform and the black shirt inside. Only the white chest wrapping cloth was wrapped around her body. She abruptly froze. Just as she was about to push him away, Xiao Fei sat firmly by her side and supported her slightly unstable body. I'm sorry, I discovered your secret, but I had no choice but to unbutton your clothes in order to save you. When I saw inside, I stopped so I didn't see anything I shouldn't have seen. Feng Ling did want to push him away, but she didn't have the strength right now. She just sat there stiffly, raised her hands, and gripped the 2 layers of clothes tightly, covering her shoulders and collarbone. At the same time, she raised her eyes that were red from coughing and looked at him cautiously. Seeing her expression, Xiao Fei understood what she meant. You pretended to be a man because you wanted to stay in the base safely, didn't you? Feng Ling didn't speak, but her expression was very bad. But just now, Xiao Fei saved her life, so she couldn't say anything. Besides, he really didn't unbutton her clothes. CPR did require her to unbutton her clothes. Xiao Fei didn't do anything wrong. She didn't even have any reason to blame him. Don't worry. As long as you don't have any impure motives and don't do anything that will threaten the base, I won't tell anyone about this matter. Xiao Fei looked at her and thought of her excellent performance. A girl was actually more hardworking than a man. On one hand, he admired her, but on the other hand, his heart suddenly softened because of her. However, just now, he accidentally discovered this secret, so he was a little embarrassed. He said hoarsely, I swear, I really didn't see anything just now. Feng Ling closed her eyes and slowed down. Only she knew the way her chest wrapping cloth was wrapped. She also knew at a glance whether it had been undone or not. Xiao Fei didn't lie to her. Besides, Xiao Fei was the deputy drill master of the sniper team, which was equivalent to half a superior to her. Coupled with his promise earlier, she couldn't say anything more. Drill Master Qiao. Her voice was a little hoarse. At this moment, there was a burning pain in her chest, and she said hoarsely with some difficulty, "I'm an orphan. I don't have parents and I have nowhere to go. 11 Base is now a home for me. The base doesn't accept women, so I have no choice but to do this. Since you know now, I don't want to explain too much, but please keep it a secret for me." Xiao Fei looked at her for a while and nodded. "All right, don't worry. I won't tell anyone. Right now, the most important thing is that you need to go to the hospital immediately. I think boss should be almost done with it. If he knows that we're missing, he will definitely come to take us away as soon as possible. You must hold on." Feng Ling nodded weakly. She had inhaled a lot of smoke on the cruise ship. That kind of smoke was very fatal. She had held on for so long, but in the end, when she needed fresh air the most, she fell into the sea and choked on a lot of water. She knew that her condition was very serious. If she didn't see a doctor, there would probably be a lot of sequelae, and she might even need to have a lung operation. But no matter what, at least her life was saved. At the moment when she fell into the sea, she didn't think that she could come back alive. But now that she had survived, she certainly wouldn't allow herself to die casually. This place is not far from the coastline. They will soon find us along the road. Let me help you find a comfortable place to sit for a while. Xiao Fei reached out to help Feng Ling up. There were several obvious reefs on the side of the island. After helping Feng Ling sit down, he also sat by the side. Feng Ling sat on the reef, fastening the buttons of her shirt with some difficulty, while looking expressionlessly at the thick smoke that had yet to dissipate near the coastline in the distance. Seeing that Feng Ling seemed to be struggling to fasten the buttons, Xiao Fei knew that she was a woman and was embarrassed to touch her again. Earlier, when he helped her up, he didn't dare to hold her waist and only held her arm to help her to the reef. After all, this position was very obvious and could easily be discovered by the helicopter. Right now you feel that your lungs hurt when you move, right? Do you want me to help you? Xiao Fei sat by the side and asked. Seeing that Feng Ling's movements paused, Xiao Fei coughed awkwardly and explained. In any case, I'm just helping you fasten the buttons and zipper. I don't have any impure thoughts. I just think that it's too strenuous for you to do it yourself. Chapter 809. Xiao Fei watched her. He saw that Feng Ling had been staring at the smoke-filled sky, but she did not speak. Actually, he had many questions he wanted to ask. For example, she was a young girl. How did she manage to survive in the all-male 11 base? After all, in the past, he was in Team 2, and was not in the same team as Feng Ling. He could only notice this beautiful and clean young man during training and some missions. At that time, he had a deep impression of her. Later, when he joined the sniper team, he paid special attention to her. At that time, he thought it was because this young man was too young and too outstanding, attracting his attention. Later on, he could not help but want to show concern for her, or give her a few more pointers. He even thought that he was really interested in a beautiful man. But now, he finally confirmed that it was nothing more than the attraction of the opposite sex. No matter how well she dressed up as a man, she was still a woman in her bones. It was inevitable that he would be attracted to her. Right now, he could not imagine how a girl could survive in a place with so many men. There must be many inconveniences. How did she manage to survive? More importantly, she had not been discovered at all. It was one thing if others were confused, but how could the usually calm, decisive and observant Bosley not discover it? But thinking about it, Bosley had been away for 2.5 years. He had only interacted with Feng Ling for 3 to 4 months. Their usual contact was only during training. It was not strange. What's the situation over there? Feng Ling looked in the direction of the coastline and asked hoarsely. There are so many terrorists there. Are you sure there won't be any problems? We don't have many people, and there's an ambush. You should worry about yourself first. If the people in the base are wiped out because of these terrorists, then the two of us probably won't be able to leave this island in the short term. Firstly, you're injured. Secondly, there's still a long distance from here to the coastline. No matter how good you are in the water, you might not have the strength to swim back. Xiao Fei sighed with a smile. In that case, we can only wait here to starve to death. And your lungs need to be taken care of. Staying here for too long won't do you any good. Feng Ling looked over quietly, raised her hand to touch her chest and lungs, and did not speak again. Don't worry. Usually, Boss and Han Jin don't have many missions at the same time. It's rare for Boss to lead the team in person. There won't be any problem. The elites of the entire 11 base are here. If something can go wrong, then we can just cancel our base and go back to playing house. Xiao Fei said as he watched her touch her chest. What's wrong? Is it very painful? Feng Ling shook her head. I'm fine. I'll be fine in a while. She was clearly still a young girl, but she was so calm and indifferent as if she shouldn't be at this age. Not to mention that she usually went through wind and rain. She still didn't have the slightest bit of complaint or cowardice. If it were any other ordinary girl, not to mention saving people, she would probably cry for her parents after falling into the sea for a while. Xiao Fei removed his jacket and laid it on a flat spot on the reef behind Feng Ling. If you're really uncomfortable, why don't you lie down first? No, I'm fine. Don't try to be brave at this time. Any man will feel pain in his internal organs after being affected by the explosion, not to mention you are a girl. Feng Ling turned to look at him calmly. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, just pretend that you didn't find anything just now. I am a man, a member of 11 base, not a girl. Xiao Fei's breath stopped. Seeing her determined eyes, he sighed slightly. All right, lie down first. Just like before, you are the Deputy Drill Master, and I am a member of the sniper team. You are my superior. There is no need to treat me like this. Feng Ling's voice was hoarse and calm. I am no different from others. He understood that Feng Ling hoped that nothing had happened. If the person who found out that she was a girl was someone else, she would probably kill him. However, the person who found out was her deputy instructor. Apart from giving him a few reminders, she couldn't do anything else. At the very least, she would be worried that her secret would be leaked out. Xiao Fei did not make things difficult for her. He raised his hand and heavily smacked her head. He used the same strength he usually used on the other members of the team. All right, don't be so long-winded. I'm not that talkative. I won't send away the most promising member of the sniper team just to share a secret. Don't you think so? Feng Ling's heart was pounding. Xiao Fei did not make things difficult for her. He raised his hand and heavily smacked her head. He used the same strength he usually used on the other members of the team. Feng Ling didn't feel much pain after being patted, but her short hair, which was still wet and sticky from the seawater when she just came to the island, was now pressed against the scalp on the back of her head. She shook her hair, and a few strands of short hair on her forehead swayed a few times. Xiao Fei watched this scene. In his mind, he was already imagining how Feng Ling would look like if she had long hair like other girls and wore ordinary clothes. Compared to Feng Ling's fair and clean face, she could still look so beautiful in men's clothes. Once she turned back into a woman, he thought of how Feng Ling usually trained with Kay and the other big men in the base and rolled around together in the mud. Those stinky brats really got off too easy. All of a sudden, a huge explosion sounded from the abandoned warehouse where the terrorists were gathered. Feng Ling and Xiao Fei both turned to look in that direction. After the explosion, black smoke rose from the abandoned warehouse. The flames were even more terrifying than the ones on the cruise ship. The thick black smoke was slowly swallowed up by the sea. Amidst the black smoke, 3 helicopters slowly flew in this direction. Below them, 2 inflatable rafts were pulled by the sea. Even though they couldn't see clearly from afar, they could tell that 11 Base had sent people to search for them after finding out that they had gone missing. The location where Feng Ling and Xiao Fei were sitting on the reef was very obvious. The helicopters passed through the thick black smoke and instantly discovered the small island in front of them. They directly flew over. When the helicopters approached and were about to land, The large propellers stirred up the surrounding wind and steadily landed on the island. Everyone on the 3 helicopters disembarked. Feng Ling turned back to look at the helicopters behind her. When she saw that Li Nanheng was walking in this direction unscathed, her heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. Strangely, it was as though she had escaped from death herself. However, she didn't know what it was. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.